Dear listeners, a huge shout out to all our listeners. We have received a ton of comments and suggestions. We are still going through and checking what all can be implemented. Please suggest if you have not done it so far, and don't forget to drop a hi in the comments section. That hi means a lot to us. Now let's start with the story. I was sitting there thinking something was seriously wrong. This was neither the first nor the last of my painful, lonely solo times. I didn't know what it was. It certainly had everything to do with her months of on-site research in a strange community in southern Utah. My wife of 5 years had returned from 2 months of research in the desert parts of southern Utah. She had been doing the final research for her PhD with a major in sociology. Now she was spending day and night alone at her computer typing out her experiences and research findings for her thesis. It seems that I was spending many days and nights also alone at my desk trying to deal with the interpersonal problems building between Susan and me. I felt it was all her fault. She would not participate in solving that growing serious problem of trust. She remained aloof to my pleas for dialogue. I was running out of ideas on how to deliver myself from my growing pain and suspicions. Susan was not going to help. She had never been this way before we parted on our trips. You will probably ask why I think something is wrong. Well, let me give you some stuff to digest and see if you come out wondering like I am. First, let me give you a little history about us. Well, I am a geologist currently working for an oil exploration company. Yep, we study rock and what's in between them, like oil and gas. I graduated with a master's degree 3 years ago. I'll brag just a little. Sorry about that, but I am good at what I do. I graduated summa cum laude and I have great hand-eye coordination. Guess that's why I am world-class as a marksman and a reasonably good cellist. I can also deliver the echo probe at 800 feet underwater to within an inch of where we want it. My pay reflects my knowledge and skills. After graduate school, I was heavily recruited and went immediately to work in oil exploration. Being top of my class helped to get just the job I wanted. There still is a lot of competition in the oil exploration and drilling community about who will get to the oil first and cheapest. The big oil companies feel that new sources of oil are important. My job of finding new sources is important to them. I am an average, 70 inches tall and 175 pounds, light brown hair and a little goatee. My name is Ethan Allen. Sorry, no relationship to the famous furniture manufacturer. I have to make my own fame. My wife is 67 inches tall, with nice hips and long black hair almost to her waist. She goes by Susan. She has a little tick of swirling her head to make her hair swing, sometimes even over her shoulder. She has a very plain Jane face, but a little makeup and a smile with her hair hanging loosely over her shoulder. She is lithe and slim with near-perfect, sensuous female proportions. You can correctly surmise that she is quite intelligent also. Proof of this being that she had graduated magna cum laude and had been accepted into a well-known doctoral program here in Utah. She's basically an academic type. She taught high school 1 year out of college before her master's. She loves academia, research, and teaching. As it turns out, she loved them too much. My wife and I met in college in Colorado, my home state. We got married in college. That was 5 years ago. She was a junior and I was a senior. We both finished master's degrees in our chosen fields. Hers is sociology, minor in psychology, the study of behavior of groups of people. Mine is a lot harder field. Geologists study rocks and the earth and everything from the surface down. While in college, I was elected president of the college's Marksman Society. This and playing cello in the concert orchestra were my extracurricular activities. I have maintained an interest in both. I was really good with numerous awards won in national collegiate competition. Susan had been active in the drama society also. Let me say a little about our families. I really know very little about her family other than her mother was divorced or was a single parent. Her mother never talked of Susan's father. Neither did Susan. I didn't care, presuming he was a non-entity now for the both of them. We continued to be on friendly terms with Susan's mom. I didn't push her about her past. She did finish high school and then went on to college here in Utah for a teaching certificate and bachelor's in education. She teaches in the lower grades. She seems happy, very quiet, efficient, and dedicated to her teaching. I think Susan picked up her traits. I detect a dark side when I ask Susan about her family of origin. Susan won't talk about her early years. I didn't push her either. My wife was an only child. I have 2 younger brothers. One is in the Army and the other is in the Air Force. We don't see much of them as they are being constantly deployed around the world. My parents live in Colorado, not too far from us. We visit them occasionally and stay in touch frequently by telephone. I just got back in town a couple of days ago. This was only a couple of days after she got back from her research study. I picked up my car at the corporate headquarters where it had been stored in the secure parking area for the last 2 months. I had left it there before flying out to Africa. I drove the last 50 miles to our hometown where we had a nice but small ranch-style home in the beautiful valley. The little town is surrounded by distant high snow-covered peaks. The valley has plenty of water year-round. This town is as close to heaven as I could get on this planet called Earth. I traveled to offshore West Africa on and off doing oil exploratory studies. On this trip, I had been gone almost 9 weeks. In return, I get plenty of in-between off time and can file reports online from home. Originally, Susan and I had agreed for her to spend 1 month on site where her research for her thesis would be conducted. I was to be shipbound in the burning hot Eastern Atlantic off the coast of West Africa. We both left home the same day, me to Atlantic Africa and she to southern Utah. I had taken her to the bus station, then returned home. I drove to corporate headquarters, parked my car in the secure area, and hailed a cab to the airport. Upon returning, it was always just the opposite. When I got back, Susan greeted me at the door and welcomed me back to the States. She didn't say, "Welcome home," just, "Welcome back to the States." She told me she had just gotten back a few days ago. Obviously, she had been gone 2 months, not just 1. Immediately after entering our front door and greeting Susan, she told me she had a very heavy schedule in preparing her thesis and she needed to be isolated in the den to continue recording and analyzing her data. For this reason, she stated simply, "I have put a lock on the den door to ensure that I am not disturbed, so please don't bother me when I am working." I saw no need for a lock as I would honor her reasonable request without need for a lock. I saw no need to lock me out. I told her that. She had not informed me of her extra long stay. She did tell me she had no access to telephones or email. She said she was living in this town and had to fit in with their clannish and peculiar lifestyle if she were to gather the information she wanted for her research thesis. Somehow I couldn't believe that she couldn't notify me. This seemed preposterous. After all, cell phones are everywhere. She also has a prepaid long-distance card. She took her laptop, which has internet access. Heck, I could talk to our other teams off the coast of Brazil or the one researching the Arctic Ocean off Alaska, all from Africa. Surely she could call from southern Utah. I had tried multiple times to contact her by email, but each had remained unchecked. That had been my only means of communicating directly with her, and it didn't work. I didn't have a telephone number at which to call her. I also had emailed the university to help establish contact with her, but they were of no help. She was not in communication with them either. I had worried about her safety. I told I had worried about her. Her counter to my statement about worldwide easy access to communications with me was that I was away, so it didn't make any difference. She said she could take care of herself, and I shouldn't have worried. She couldn't understand that I was interested in her and her activities even though I couldn't change anything. I don't think she tried very hard to tell me of her change in plans to stay longer. She wouldn't tell me much of anything about her living conditions either. She did live with one of the families while she was there. She had made some contacts on prior visits to the targeted town, that much I knew. Now she was typing away furiously and avoiding me. Her explanations were that she had to get her research into the computer and organized into thesis form. She was doing her dissertation on a splinter group from the Mormon Church. These groups lived in closed, rural, isolated communal towns. Susan said that not much was known from a scientific point of view. Lots of accusations and innuendo abounded, but there was not too much real research into the inner lives of the community. I think I recalled some scandal down there on the local news some years ago, but couldn't recall the particulars. I knew that outsiders were not welcome. Susan's research took her into one such closed community. Her project called for 1 month only on site. She had stayed longer. She explained that she stayed to complete her research rather than having to go back again at a later date. I wondered if my perception that they really were a tightly closed exclusionary society was wrong. I wondered how Susan, being an outsider, had gained access to them over such an extended period of time. Perhaps they had made some sort of exception for Susan. Did they know she was there to research them? These questions were perplexing, and Susan wouldn't talk to me about anything that had to do with her research. She really is dedicated to and working hard to complete her PhD. I admire her for those, but know there is something radically different about her since she came back. This lack of communications just didn't click with me. I told her so. She got a little irritated, saying that doctoral research is much more complicated and difficult than most people understand. The clear implication is that I am one of the non-understanding persons. She wouldn't discuss any issue regarding her 2-month stay with me further. She had shared her research project and methodology with me before departing. Now that she had completed her research, even with the changes she had to make, why couldn't she share her experiences with me? She had to tell her thesis committee everything, but she wouldn't share anything with me. I felt like I was excluded from this part of our recent history. The questions seemed trivial and non-threatening to me, but to her they obviously were in some twisted sense of her reasoning. For this first time in our 5 years of married life together, I really felt Susan was hiding something from me. Something important enough had occurred to cause me constant friction and increasing tension. She just was close-mouthed about it all. She would tell me that she would tell me someday after my thesis is done. This was of no comfort to me. Why not tell me now? The most noticeable thing, and the very first thing I had noticed on my return, was just too obvious to miss. It was the way she dressed. Before all this, she dressed as any 26-year-old married woman would. Not too sexy and not too conservative. She always liked to show her cleavage, but not too much of it. She had always worn skirts that were just above knee length. She enjoyed jeans and pantsuits and looked great in them. She knew that she was not beautiful, so she had concentrated on using her makeup to brighten her face, and it was successful. She always used perfume and makeup. Now, she was dressing ultra-conservatively. Her dresses were closed to her neck and elongated to ankle length. During the first month back, she changed her dress into even stranger attire. Essentially, she was wearing what I call tint dresses. Susan was anything but fat. She had a body to die for, even if her facial features were far less attractive. Things had changed, however. Now she wore very plain, uninspiring, longitudinally striped outfits, gray or gray-blue. God knows where she could find these monstrosities to wear, but somehow she had acquired them. I didn't like them at all. It did nothing to reveal her naturally beautiful body, which she had been proud of before all this. She now wore no perfume or lipstick. She had always had long, straight black hair that she brushed and let hang down freely well below her shoulders. Now she rolled it up into a ball behind her head. Her presentation was nothing less than ugly. I told her that, but she didn't care any more about her self-image or how badly I was disappointed in her. Susan, thanks for showing me what those pervs wear down there in the boon is. When will you get back into the 21st century? I appreciate your show, but it will be wonderful to see you as you were. Your dresses are terrible, your hair is worse, and your body stinks. How can you do this to me? All she said would say is, well, she would not reply. Just turned away and went back into seclusion in her den. No mention of changing was ever made. She never wore decent clothes again, to my knowledge. I continually commented negatively, almost to the point of harassment. One time after my degrading comments, she got a little ticked off and said she had gotten used to dressing like the women there and actually enjoyed the looser clothing and the more conservative dress style. In addition, it helped keep her in the mood and mode of what she wore while she recorded her research and worked on her thesis. I told her I didn't like it at all and would appreciate it if she would just dress like all the rest of us in the outside world, as she identified us normal people now. She looked like the pictures I had seen in a magazine of those communal wives in towns back 200 years or so. Maybe I had seen the picture on an oatmeal container. Anyway, I hated it, but she didn't care what I thought anymore. She was surely acting strangely so far as I was concerned. At night, it was no different. She would come to bed in a long plain gray cotton nightgown. She would not kiss me after we were in bed. Even the formerly very pleasant caressing of her beautiful and desirable body was rebuffed day and night. Her body was off limits to me, her husband. She would say, if I get aroused, I won't be able to resist going all the way with you. That would mess with my emotions and my memories, which would taint my unique research. I kept trying, but none of my pleading and requests would change her back into the sensuous female she had been. Finally, I got tired of being refused and routinely turned my back to her in bed immediately, thus avoiding the inevitable rebuff and refusal. I told her it was like we weren't married any longer. Even that met with a flat response. She continued to be glued to her computer. She hardly comes out of our den, which she has taken over. Her excuse is that she is trying to avoid anything that would taint her recollection of her research. This line of bullshit, as I called it to her face, really ticked me off. Talking about it would, in her mind, taint her research. She was in communication with her thesis professor, however. She would talk to him, yet not to me. I was really getting irritated. My house was no longer my home, but a source of irritation. The reason being who was living in it at my expense, financially and emotionally. Could I do nothing about it? She was my wife and I wanted her back. Frustration rose. Susan had apparently picked up some type of stomach infection while on site. She had been sick for a few days before she arrived back, and she continued to be sick now that she was back home. She was frequently nauseated, especially in the mornings. She kept saltine crackers at her side of our queen-sized marital bed. Those seemed to help her upset stomach. Several times I asked her to go to a doctor to find out what was wrong. She promised to do this, but to my knowledge, she never did. After the first few weeks, she was feeling well again. In fact, she looked great. All I was allowed to see of her was her face and hands. She had warm, full pink cheeks, and her lips were so soft when she allowed me to kiss her. After she had recovered, she said since her nausea had gone away and had not come back, she didn't see any need to go to a doctor. I didn't see a reason to go either. After all, she was not sick anymore. A friend of mine at work, after I told him of my wife's condition, mentioned that hepatitis could have caused her upset stomach and inquired she had gotten all her hepatitis shots. Acute hepatitis can relent and then become chronic, resulting in later liver failure, he had told me. I passed that on to Susan. We had both had all the immunizations recommended by the CDC. She never turned yellow. I suggested she visit a doctor to get the blood tests that would prove she was immune or had had an infection. She refused to go since, I feel okay now. She does help with household duties, but minimally. Before her trip, she seemed to enjoy doing things with me around the house, such as meals. Not so now. She attributes the need to meet a deadline for her thesis if she is to obtain her degree this spring. She had been working on this now for several years, that is, on her degree. She had not formally expressed the urgent desire to finish her degree this year. She has another 2 years allocated by the university, but now the race to completion has taken over her life. She was absolutely intent on completing everything now. I told her that our relationship was suffering because of her sudden intense dedication to her thesis. She told me that the intensity of work needed to complete a thesis had always been known to me. Now was the best and only time to finish. I couldn't grasp the need for such a big rush all of a sudden. I asked her if her academic goals had changed. If so, then I might be able to understand. Her reply was that she wanted to use her high school teaching skills again beginning that coming fall. She wanted to have her terminal degree in hand when she started back again. That made some sense to me for her to go ahead and finish. Her reasoning didn't make total sense to me. She already had her teaching certificate. She also had 2 years remaining to finish her degree. So why did she have this sudden big push now? This sudden flurry of high-intensity activity was testing our marriage to beyond the limits. A PhD isn't required for high school teaching. Only tenured university positions require that level of education. It didn't make sense to me. Her explanations fell short of satisfying my curiosity. Now in the past, we always were very careful to talk about all our plans together before making decisions. She was carefully avoiding our previous snuggling and sex times. These were the times when our most intense sharing occurred. Now, here she was, off making decisions that affected our marriage. She hadn't even notified me, much less discussed these to see what my feelings were. I told her that this was very troubling. She was making such a decision unilaterally, without our usual husband-wife discussion. This behavior was a radical impact to our relationship. I told her I was not against her going back to teaching high school, but she should have at least talked to me about it prior to making that decision. I asked her where was she applying for a teaching job. She avowed that she had not made that decision yet. There is only one high school in our little community. The next closest is a distant 30 miles. Susan, I commented, if you plan to teach here again, you definitely need to talk to the principal or school board soon. Any position available might otherwise get filled before you even apply. She said she would do that at the appropriate time, but for now she was too busy. First things first, she said. Susan, are you too busy to make even one phone call or two just to see if a position is available this fall? We have to plan ahead. Do you want me to find out for you? She told me in no uncertain terms not to get involved in her affairs. She could handle things by herself without my interference, as she put it. In my own time, she said with finality. Nothing apparently mattered now to her except her thesis completion and degree acquisition. I felt she was not seeing herself, or me perhaps, as an integral part of each other's lives. This attitude of forcing me out of her decision-making concerned me. Did she not realize how integral a part she is of us? Her decisions would be affecting me, and I didn't have a vote. Time seems to have a way of continuing without asking me. We continued superficial dialogue and a little about her peculiar need and intense desire to rush her degree to early completion. Her stomach quit bothering her. Health improved, but our marital relationship continued to deteriorate. We grew increasingly distant. I had a busy job as a research geologist. My days were filled with meetings, reports, and trips to the home office. I had another of-country trip for which I needed to plan. Susan wouldn't talk about future dates and plans. We had always coordinated my trips with her. Now I could not make plans with her input. Our life together was coming apart. My life was interesting and happy other than my deteriorating home situation with my wife. We rocked along rather precariously. I tiptoed around her emotionally and literally. She was absorbed in another world in which I had no place, nor was I invited into her new world. In fact, quite the opposite. I was both directly and indirectly excluded. My anxiety thickened. I began to have stomach pains. My doctor prescribed a stomach acid inhibitor, but it was only partly successful. My gut was being wrenched apart not by acid, but by anxiety. I need for my life to be organized. I hate surprises. I need for things to be discussed, agreed to, and planned carefully. Sure, we need to have contingency plans, but these need to be part of the planning. Now, my wife was turning my world into a morass of unknowns. I don't deal well with just going with the flow and letting things happen. Was my loving wife abandoning me for her precious academic career? All this seemed entirely unnecessary to me. How long could I endure uncertainty? I was fearful I could crash anytime. Neither of us used alcohol or drugs, so I retreated into playing and practicing my cello to fill my emptiness, loneliness, and rejection. In short, I was miserable. I couldn't even see when all this was going to end. In the evening supper times, I would frequently ask her about her progress that day and about her daily activities. I made this a point when I had been gone for the day. Our conversations were always superficial and banal. One evening I decided to again probe into her living conditions while she had been on site with her research. "Susan, just what were the details of your living arrangements? Did you have a separate bedroom?" I probed. "Ethan," she only used my formal name when she was irritated. "How many times do I have to tell you I'll tell you everything when the burden of this thesis is off my back? Now quit making life harder for me while I have so much to do. Just don't ask me again." Susan practically yelled her answer at me. "Damn it, Ethan. You're really making me very angry with all these questions when you know I won't answer them until my PhD is assured. I've told you that time and time again, but you won't leave it be. Just get off my back about all this. You know I am stressed out as it is trying to get this thesis completed. Your hassling me just slows me down." She walked off in an over-exaggerated, stilted walk. Looking back over her shoulder, she spit out, "Now you have made me angry, and I won't be able to concentrate on my thesis tonight." She disappeared into hers now, den and locked me out. She had spoken those exact words a few evenings ago. My patience was wearing very thin very rapidly. My attitude toward her became increasingly belligerent. My anger was not just subtle anymore. Nevertheless, I had to be content with no wife and no information about her life. Time kept moving right on, and the days became weeks which merged into months. I just couldn't understand. Creeping suspicions of future marital disaster invaded my mind and scraped open sores on my psyche. "Would you have concerns like mine?" Her standard and pat answer was always, "Unexpected changes in my methodology have made me change lots of things." She did say, "I have obtained some totally new information requiring extensive and necessary changes. Everything seemed to need to be changed and discussed with my thesis committee. The changes have complicated everything for me. Susan, can you not tell me at least what this new information was? What exactly were all these unexpected changes that require so much of your attention? You know, the ones that make me excluded from your life? Sweetheart, if I may call you that, how did you go about getting this new and revealing information you speak of? Surely you can tell me, your trusted husband." Her reply was to the effect that she was worried that I might get all emotional if she were to tell me all the details. I might get mad at the people involved in the family and community. My emotional feedback would have a negative effect on her recording her true and unique feelings and experiences. Understanding any of this escaped me totally. I could give a rat's shit for those people. I already abhorred what I knew about their polygamous relationships. How could her telling me more about their family and community life make me any more disdainful or incite any new anger or more emotional response? I was already burned out even thinking about their odd lifestyle. I was glad these people were stuck away in a distant corner of nowhere. I wanted nothing to do with them. I think I was beginning to hate them. They had stolen my sensuous wife and turned her into an ogre. My anger and resentment grew for her seemingly unnecessary secrecy. She stuck with her explanations and I stuck with my anxiety. I wondered out loud to her that I would only get emotional if she had been caught up in their polygamy personally, not just observing it. She would not reply. She said she used her intelligent ingenuity to obtain the information in what might be seen as unconventional methodology. Her explanation raised more questions than it answered and certainly added significantly to my stress level. I told that her refusal to reveal her activities were more stressful and a source of more anger and frustration to me than if she were to just be totally truthful and tell me everything. Anyway, that is how I assess the situation. All will be revealed and discussed in full at the proper time, which is soon approaching. We had been loggerheads now about 5 months. From the very day I had returned, she refused sex with me. Our sex life had not just deteriorated, it had died. We have not had sex since the day before we both left. It was after that tender and satisfying sex that we had lay in each other's arms and again sworn our love and fidelity. We had had great sex 3 or 4 times a week before this fiasco. Our sex was always tender and gentle and mutually fulfilling. She made suggestions as to how I might please her more. I always did these. I made requests of her, and she always complied. Neither of us wanted for anything regarding sex within the bonds of marriage. We both enjoyed the teasing and foreplay of the romantic encounters. We had snuggle times after sex. Not infrequently we would go for a second bout before retiring for the night. I miss all of this a lot. I couldn't see how depriving me, her confidential life mate and loving husband, of my rightful access to her body could taint her research. If it could, I began to wonder just what all had her research entailed. If sex with her husband could contaminate her research, then it seemed logical that sex had to have been a part of her research. We had agreed and promised at our marriage that monogamy was to be sacred to us. We had agreed several times to be faithful. I was doing my part by refusing the many opportunities one had both here and abroad. Susan and I had even talked about how these groups practiced multiple wife families before she went on her research trip. We had joked about her becoming a 3rd or 4th wife for research purposes. I had expressed to her how abhorrent that practice is. She knew that I could never live that way. I also remember telling her that to listen to the wives was one thing, but to actually experience that role would not be acceptable to me in any fashion whatsoever. She agreed totally before she left. I had trusted her implicitly. Since I was so sure of her fidelity to me before she went to southern Utah, I had had no reason to have any fear or even suspicions neither of infidelity nor of her research methods. I really felt secure in allowing her a solo visit to the community she had targeted. But now our sex life had died. Why would she not have sex with me anymore? We did kiss and renew our vows of our everlasting love for each other, but she allowed no sexual contact and refused to allay my fears of her infidelity. Other than some less than just polite kisses, her body had been off limits since she came back. She had moved my books and computer into a corner in the large dining room and had bought several large bookcases and file cabinets. These nicely matching bookcases were stationed adjacent to my computer desk in the dining room. Effectively, she had moved my work into the dining room. I had quite a bit of research findings to compile into reports to my company superiors. She could, and did, lock me out. After a few more days, I just outright asked her if she had participated in any sexual way that might have a negative on our marriage. Had she kept her promises of sexual fidelity within our marriage? She really got hostile and defensive, and then in an angry outburst said she would not discuss anything about her research until her dissertation was completed and accepted by the university. I was not to ask her again. Now I knew I had a really major marital problem. No denying it now. Would you agree? I actually expressed anger and outrage, this being quite unusual for me, that she would be gone for 2 months and not at least reassure me that she had been true to me and our marriage. Her body language and her facial expressions told me that this was a very sensitive and emotional issue with her. Yet she would not relent in her secrecy. I told her I could see that my questions were evoking emotional responses that she averred she wanted to avoid. Seems her secrecy was provoking more emotional turmoil than just sharing. That is if there was nothing serious to hide. My concerns were now almost out of control. My stomach was growling in constant turmoil. I began to look forward to going to work and regretting to have to come back to my own home. She was home to me, but she was not mine, it seemed. She belonged to her degree seeking. How would you feel? She and I have an otherwise happy marriage, or at least we did have and maybe could in the future. I wondered if other marriages suffered as ours had when one partner was working on a thesis. I hadn't heard of it, but then again I did know that her doctoral thesis must be one hell of a project. Her self-imposed time constraints made everything worse. After one discouraging and anger-filled encounter I had it. Susan, I angrily spouted out, it looks like you have destroyed our sharing, confidentiality, and trusting. I think our marriage is very close to past history for us, and you are entirely to blame. I kept berating her about everything she was doing to me. Finally, I just stomped out and drove around to nowhere, hoping my anger would dissipate in the cool night air. As I drove around, I tried to get my thoughts out in front of my emotions. She has been telling me that she loves me and hopes I will love her also. I kept reassuring her that I do still love her, but I hated how she was treating me. Communications is the key to a relationship, and she won't talk to me about so many things in her life now. She won't reassure me about her marital fidelity. Why? Did she have an affair? Did she do more sexual stuff in order to get her research done? All I knew was that this was putting a terrible strain on me and my marriage. Do I have to prepare for single life again? My mind just couldn't emerge from the morass of my anxiety and emotional turmoil. I determined that this turmoil would end sooner than later. If she wouldn't end it, I would. I thought of the pain of moving out and getting on with my life without her. I couldn't yet visualize life without her. I decided not to ask her anymore, but to find out what I could on my own. Perhaps someone at the university could help me. But who? I began to reflect more and more. Looking back, I began to summarize for myself the changes I had seen and experienced. Her strange dress and lack of makeup were more than just odd. Her not using her favorite perfume was not like the Susan I knew. Her refusal for sex almost 5 months was most alarming. I hated the radical changes in her behavior. I was even beginning to hate the one I had loved. From then on, she expressed further interest in what I did or how I felt. There was no cuddling, teasing, or sex that night or any subsequent nights. Naturally, that brought about a lot of interest on my part, not even considering the anger for her boorish behavior. I began a new way of interacting with her, a way that was distasteful, distressing, anxiety-producing, and increasingly barrier-building. I avoided asking her about anything. Routinely, she locked the door when she was typing. Therefore, I had less opportunity to confront her. This was something new. I had never been locked out of anywhere in my house. She had a headset with microphone and earphones. She explained this was needed to communicate with her major professor at considerably less expense than by phone. Her campus was only a mile or so from my headquarters, closer to the eastern edge of the city. She also said she used her email a lot to write to her professor. I had to agree that email was cheaper and faster than ground snail mail, even though it was only 50 miles to campus for her. This all made good sense to me, except why I was locked out until she was off the computer. That made me suspicious. I told her that I was really uncomfortable with her locking me out of her life like she did. She would smile and tell me that she just couldn't have any interference when she doing her research. I could understand only some of that. I had lingering doubts. I told her I felt she was not being open to me as we had always promised to be. She dismissed my concerns as trivial and nothing to be concerned about. Her refusal to be open and then to say it was not important was totally discordant, totally new in our marriage. I really took offense and told her that. Susan continued to downplay it, even with my vigorous objections. Another change had occurred. She was now keeping everything on her computer under password protection. I asked her about this, and she got angry at me for me poking around on her computer. "You have your own computer, so you don't need to be messing around on mine," was her standard answer. She really got touchy about that. I guess the academic types are paranoid about their research identities. I could see nothing to get excited about if she had nothing to hide. I told her that, and she really lit into me about distrusting her. She said I might mess up her research by accidentally deleting something. I asked her if she didn't back up her files at least every few hours in case the computer crashed. Susan had no answer but just turned away, indicating that the conversation was over. Why was her research so confidential? I wasn't going to tell anyone and let someone else know of her findings, that is, steal her research. She just wouldn't budge on the secrecy thing. In fact, my concerns were adding up to a major problem for me. She wouldn't acknowledge any marital problem, or any problem for that matter. She was just closed to me. Too many things had changed. We just weren't communicating like we used to do. That was my biggest concern. Everything else paled when compared to the lack of sharing. There was an intangible barrier of distrust developing on my part. I told her so, and she dismissed it as nothing. But it was everything to me. I tried to tell her that, but it seemed like it didn't sink in. Something about her had changed radically. I could sense it and see it. It was painfully evident to me. "Susan," I told her, "you have changed so much since going out on your research project." I was being emphatic. Her replies were all the same standard nonsense. She would just say that now she had to get her research completed. She had worked hard and long, and now her degree was only a few months away. She reassured me that everything would be okay real soon. "Susan," I responded, "I need to be your husband now. I need you as my wife now, not at some future unknown time." "When is this future time? When will we be a couple again? Tell me, Susan." "Honey, just hold on." She avowed how her dissertation was most difficult. She told me that the research had taken an unexpected twist, whatever that meant. This change had complicated her research, which meant the extra month and the extra time on the computer to reorganize her thesis and its defense. She would not give me an actual time frame for when this strange behavior would return to normal. She would reassure me her thesis was almost completed. Then she would disappear back into her locked room. Real reassurance that satisfied me just wasn't forthcoming. I had never distrusted her before, but I never had cause either. My concerns deepened about what had happened. I was becoming increasingly suspicious and paranoid. All during this time, I was commuting back and forth to the main office in the big city. It was a pleasant drive there and back. The roads were in top shape, and in the city, streets were so wide that traffic was never a problem. When not commuting, I was reviewing the reams of data or on my computer completing the entry of our research findings. Making reports seemed endless. Sometimes I just surfed or got my cello out to play. On one of my numerous 50-mile trips to my main office, I suggested to my boss that we set up computer-to-computer voice communications between the home office and the various field units to include those of us who were commuting to work. This suggestion was met with approval, and I was provided with the passwords. After installation, this cut down the need for the less important but time-consuming trips. As a result, I had more home time. It was time to exercise and practice the cello. I also commented to my boss about the changes in my wife's behavior since her return. He suggested I talk with her major professor at the university across town, since she was working closely with him. That seemed like a very good idea. It also coincided with my own previous thoughts. I immediately called his office and spoke with the departmental secretary. She set me up with an appointment a couple of days later, on Thursday of that week. I asked the secretary to tell him was about my wife's doctoral research and kindly not to tell her I was coming to consult with him. She assured me that all his appointments were confidential. I drove home that evening feeling somewhat better. Since my concerns were piling up and I was beginning to seek outside help, I decided to do some inside mystery solving. First on my list was to check our bank accounts, savings accounts, and credit cards for unusual expenditures. These were easily accessed via my computer while my wife was on hers. The only unusual thing was that there were no charges for 8 weeks while she was in southern Utah on her research project. Perhaps, I wondered, she had a university account to draw down on. A grant budget? The professor could enlighten me on that when we met. She did have credit expenses for the bus trip down and back. There were no other credit card charges and no withdrawals. Likewise, nothing had been taken from our joint accounts in the way of cash before leaving. Second on my list was to invade her privacy on her computer. I did not know how to do this. A quick telephone call to our resident techie computer geek in the home office solved that question. He said it would be much easier and faster for him to bring the programs needed, and he would do the searches for me. He was convinced he could do in 2 minutes what would take me 2 weeks to do. We both laughed, and he said it would not take long, perhaps a few minutes more than 2 minutes. I knew he was right and arranged a consultation fee. During my trip the following day to the home office, I had lunch with my geek friend. I wanted to get to know him a little better. During the lunch conversation, he told me he had worked for the FBI in their identity theft unit. As a result, he had numerous contacts within the FBI plus lots of know-how about identity issues. He enjoyed being an electronic Sherlock Holmes. Now his job was quite different. Among other things, he was in charge of corporate security such as background checks, monitoring and keeping safe the research findings that our teams of geologists, like the one I was in charge of, sent to the home office. Next, we only needed a time when my wife would be out of our house for a few hours. I really hated feeling like I had to snoop around to find information that Susan should have readily shared with me. Her absence was not long in arriving. Susan soon told me she had to meet with her thesis committee the next week. She had almost completed her thesis. She would be gone all day Tuesday. Now that was the Tuesday after I would have the appointment with her major professor on the prior Thursday, which was day after tomorrow. I called my geek friend, and he promised to drive down that Tuesday morning. Nothing changed. No sex. No real kisses. No signs of her disliking me or avoiding me other than what was now common. Just a blank for interaction and sharing was all I now got from her. What had become common now was that she would not show me even the outline of her sexy body. She always had on an oversized opaque robe, full-length tank dress, or her full-length nightgown. She didn't even wear the jeans she had liked so much. Oh, well, I thought, I am going to be patient for a while longer while I gather more information. I will soon confront her and force her to tell me everything, or I was going to divorce her. Fortunately, we had no children. I met Professor Young in his third-floor spacious office. He was very pleasant and quite at ease. He offered me a drink of water, which I accepted with a smile and expressions of thanks for his time. It seems his religion prohibits tea and coffee. It was nothing to me. Several questions were put to the professor. First, I verified that he was indeed my wife's major professor and primary thesis advisor. He was chair of her thesis committee, even though he is department chair. Being chair is an administrative position, not academic. Second, I learned that my wife did have an account for expenses for her research. However, she had to show receipts for reimbursement or show travel mileage on her automobile. No, he didn't know if she had submitted any expenses, but his secretary could get a full accounting in just minutes. He called his secretary over the intercom and asked her to get my wife's grant account ready to give to me later, I asked him about her statement that her research had taken an unexpected twist which required major revisions of her thesis. He stood and looked out the window for a moment before answering. It was true there were some unexpected happenings. Yes, she had used some unconventional methodology, but her circumstances had required the changes. Susan and I should talk about what that all entailed. He didn't want to be the one to tell me about it. I told him she wouldn't share that with me, but had promised to do so once her PhD was assured. Yes, he replied. Her changes had required quite a lot of revisions, but all the committee members had expressed strong support for her research now that it was done. Susan's actual on-site time seemed a little long, but variations like that are not unusual in doctoral-level research. You should not read too much, if anything, into such a time extension. The committee would not have accepted her methodology a priori. He stared out the window, not looking at me. Finally, he turned, saying, "Speaking as a father and as a husband now, not a professor, I need to tell you that you and Susan have to have an in-depth and rational discussion about everything that occurred while she was doing her research." He was sure we were going to have lots to consider as a couple. He told me how important forgiveness is in a marriage and suggested that I might need to do a lot of this. My anxiety and suspicion level increased exponentially. I told him I knew she was meeting with her thesis committee next week and hoped that all would go well so she could get back to being normal with me. He told me he had gone over her research several times. Her committee presentation and subsequent final orals would most likely go smoothly. He anticipated no academic problems from the committee. He said he thought that her degree would be granted this spring. I told him of her ultra-conservative dress. He had already noted that and seemed a little amused. He thought she was going a little overboard in identifying with her research community, but still I should not make too much of it. His attempts to calm my fears were not working. I asked if she had been using her audio setup with communicating with him or other committee members. He said yes, of course. All of the faculty and graduate students had them installed on their computers. Certainly, voice communications via computers was common and inexpensive. Communicating with any of her thesis committee was not permitted outside the formal group meetings, of which the next was next week. I had only one other question for him. Did he know of her living arrangements while she was on site? I knew there were no motels within 10 or so miles and that she had not taken her car. She could not commute. He said she would be presenting and defending all her findings and methodology with the committee next week. Her living arrangements would certainly be part of her final presentation. She certainly was at liberty, from his standpoint, to tell me anything she wanted. He was not at liberty to discuss personal things like that without her consent. He thought it somewhat strange and unusual that she had asked him not to talk to me about her living arrangements. He had no personal or academic interests in anything Susan and I talked about. He was obviously aware of my anxiety. He told me that doctoral candidates were almost always paranoid about keeping their research secret until the committee had approved it for publication. He went on to say that her total secrecy from me was certainly highly unusual. I prepared to leave by thanking him. He inquired more about my own academic background. Upon learning of my summa cum laude graduation from a famous university in Colorado and my subsequent master's degree, he encouraged me to pursue my own PhD at his university. The chair of the geology department was a good friend of his, so he was always looking for highly qualified candidates. I could sense the recruitment and thanked him, but felt that if one PhD dissertation could stress our marriage like hers had, then another would surely destroy us as a couple. He smiled and said, "Not every candidate finds their research as difficult personally or takes it as personally as Susan has." We shook hands and parted in a friendly manner. As I was leaving, his secretary gave me a file of my wife's financial account activity for the past year. She told me that this was confidential information and should not be shared with anyone except my wife. The secretary was sure my wife had her account all this information stored in her computer already, as Susan had submitted everything electronically as I drove back home. My mind was a whirlwind of concerned activity. My suspicions had multiplied exponentially. Professor Young had done nothing to quiet my anxiety. In fact, my paranoia seemed to be justified now, based on our discussion. Still, there was no proof of infidelity. The likelihood seemed to be increasing and was highly suggestive of that possibility. The withholding seemingly harmless information from me, making me draw my own conclusions, resulted in suspicion and paranoia. There was no airtight case for infidelity yet. Arriving home, I put the folder in my desk drawer until I was in the mood. I needed heavy exercise, a hamburger, then my cello. I did not mention my trip to see her professor. This was the first time that I actually withheld some important information from her. I felt badly because now I was participating in this infidelity of sharing. I hated to do that, but could not find a way to disclose it without showing my hand prematurely. We talked of little nothings. I was really getting concerned about how our marriage was going. She asked me to understand the enormous pressure she was under. I told her it was of her own making. She disagreed. I told her dressing in long dresses, refusing to let me see her body, and her refusal of sex was leading me to believe that she had been unfaithful in some major way. Those behaviors could have nothing to do with her academic aspirations. It was becoming a major issue with me and was wearing my nerves raw. Susan, this has to change or our marriage is over. It already is in serious trouble. She just grimaced and gave me her pat, stoic, unnatural smile that I knew was forced. My heart was breaking. She said if the committee approved her thesis next Tuesday, then she would tell me everything. She expressed sorrow for the anxiety I had. She did not express sorrow for having been the cause. She turned and went to her locked room. I went into despair. Finally, it was Tuesday. She was up early and, to my astonishment, she dressed in her usual long drab dress with her hair pulled tightly into the familiar bun behind her head. Even for such an important event as presenting and defending her thesis, she dressed in that terrible clothing. Seemed to me her clothing was even more important for her thesis defense, as she was not at all physically attractive. I knew she could be so much more so in modern dress with makeup. Susan, I spoke with deep concern. You really should dress up for this event. You hold this to be so important. Don't you realize that part of your presentation is how you appear? People will judge you not just on your research, but on your whole presentation. That includes your clothing. My appearance at work was important and I wasn't even a candidate. Ethan, you don't know social studies academicians. You earth science majors and business people may think formal dress is important on formal occasions such as this, but the social studies people could care less. You should see how some of the female faculty dress. Are they married to men? I asked scornfully. She gave me that arrogant academician look and left. I was able to wish her well. I called my geek friend and confirmed she had gone. He was ready to leave and armed for bear, as he put it. He arrived with several small bags and containers with plug-ins and other electronic devices and several disks. We sat at my wife's computer. I fed him all the information he asked for, like name, social security number, mother's maiden name, birth date, etc. He was into her email in less than 2 minutes. He told me he was going to copy all her emails to a disk and I could go through them later. In about 5 seconds he had that done. Then he went into her hard disk, opening file by file, into subfiles and sub-subfiles, all password protected, but his program gave us all her passwords. He copied everything onto disks. He then went into her memory where the computer stores things. I didn't know there was anything. He went into the hard disk and copied everywhere, and every site she had visited. He copied her deleted files. He said he could copy every keystroke she had ever made. Her hard disk had so much memory space it could keep everything. He made several hard disks. He then went into her old, deleted files, the ones that we think are gone when we delete them. He put these on the hard disk also. Since she had a huge hard disk memory, he was able to retrieve everything she had deleted over the past 2 years when she had upgraded her hard drive. Finally, he went through and erased every evidence that her computer had been hacked. He smiled as he was copying everything onto backup disks. I asked him why we needed 2 copies, and he stated that 1 copy could always be lost somehow or stolen. If I had another full copy of everything from her computer at a safe place, the information would not be at risk even if someone were to find the set I kept at home. He suggested a bank deposit box. We did not look into every file but simply saved them. I already knew that there just had to be really bad stuff on the disks, stuff that had the potential to destroy our marriage. I thanked him and gave him a nice personal check. I went to the bank and rented a deposit box in my name only and deposited the backup disks for safekeeping. My wife returned after supper time, having eaten in the city and having called me to tell me to grab a hamburger for supper. When she arrived, she seemed happy. I asked her how the thesis critique went. She smiled and said it had gone even better than she had hoped. Her thesis had been accepted for publication by the University Academic Council. This is the official publications unit for the university. The committee had elected to conduct her final orals also. She had now completed all academic requirements for her degree. She was elated. There would be no further problems. Everyone concerned had reassured her. She was almost dancing. "See," she said with exuberance, "I told you so." The way I dressed had nothing to do with how good my research was and how well I presented it. I congratulated her again and again. She had succeeded in a most difficult task. Now she only had to wait until May convocation to receive her coveted PhD. I expressed high praise and congratulations. I wanted to give her a big hug. When I tried to hug and kiss her, she turned away from me. "I can't kiss you yet like we used to," she murmured. "What the hell is this all about?" I inquired. "Your degree is assured. Your research is complete. You have a state high school teaching license. You have everything you ever put your mind to. Now is the time to put your mind and heart back into making our marriage what it once was." She pulled away. "We can never go back," she said. "What the hell is all this about?" I asked. "We don't have to go back. We have to go forward." She took a step back. "I have been dreading and looking forward to this day at the same time. I still have unfinished business concerning the grant before we discuss anything else. You're delaying Susan, and for no reason," I accused her. "You're stringing me along. What is going on? No sex, no cuddling, no sharing, no love." I shouted at her. "Are we through? I can't take any more of this. Are you leaving me, or do I leave you?" She looked at me with both sadness and irritation displayed. "One more week, please, Ethan," she stated. "The financial part of my grant and the payment of the final graduation fees must be taken care of, then we will have the long-awaited talk and sharing time. Everything will be crystal clear then." I got really angry. "You have a computer. Everything can be done electronically in a matter of a few minutes, but you want a whole another damned week." This started another heated argument. It ended up that I accepted this last delay. I could not change her mind. "Sweetheart, there will be no more delays after this one. If you try to pull this crap on me again, the only delay will be how long it takes me to find a divorce lawyer. Don't get me wrong. I hate divorce, but this crap has to end. What you are putting me through is worse than divorce. It's living hell day by day. This is like picking the petals of the buttercups. She loves me. She loves me not. I don't think you love me, so I am not going to waste any more time picking petals and wondering if you love me. You simply could not love and trust me and treat me way you have these past 5 months." I went out to take a long walk to try to cool off. I was truly angry, down deep angry, and told her so. I would be back when I get back. She sat down on the couch in apparent turmoil of thoughts. As I walked in the cool evening air, I knew I was close to the breaking point. On the other hand, this final delay gave me another week to review her university grant account and her computer files I now had without her knowledge. I could be loaded for bear in less than a week. That night was a difficult night for me. I had trouble sleeping. I tossed and turned. Susan seemed to sleep fitfully also. I awakened her several times by thrashing around, but she would go right back to sleep. I tried to calm down and finally dozed off into a noxious sleep. I awoke early the next morning with my arm lying lightly across her belly. She was laying on her back, breathing gently in a deep sleep. As I moved my hand, she did not move. My hand slid to her lower abdomen. It had frequently been there before. It seemed an eternity since I had touched her body. I slid my hand slowly southward, easing lightly down to not awaken her, but to feel her. It always felt so soft and so sexy. It aggravated my early morning excitement. Something was very different. Usually her belly was flat when she was lying on her back. Now there was a smooth and noticeable lump. My curiosity was immediately aroused as I explored and felt her belly more thoroughly. I almost came unglued at the thought that flashed into my mind. This abdominal growth was smooth and rounded on the top. Really, it was almost at her navel. Obviously, it was not tender as she had not awakened. I withdrew my hand in horror. Now all her secrecy made sense. Her morning sickness that she had come home with, but finally cleared up, made sense. She was pregnant. The child could not have been mine, for she had been on birth control pills when we parted. Now I remembered that I had not seen her birth control pills since she came back. She usually left them out with her toothbrush and cosmetics. The cosmetics, of course, were gone. She didn't use them anymore. It was only now that her not taking the birth control pills made sense. She didn't need them. She was already pregnant, and with some other man's baby. My anger took over. I violently shook her awake. She screamed in fright. I kept shaking her, giving vent to my pent-up anger. What had overcome me? I wasn't a violent person, but my anger had gotten the best of me. She was crying and trying to get out of bed to get away from me. I held her tight in bed. In anger, I jumped out of bed, standing over her. I jerked her up to the sitting position. She was bleary-eyed and still half asleep. "Damn it," I yelled. "I am going to have the truth, and the whole truth now. You are pregnant with another man's baby. This thing of secrecy is over at this very minute. No more delays. I am angry as a rocked hornet's nest. You have no husband in this house anymore. You have to tell me everything, and it better be everything. I have had it." I was yelling and shaking her shoulders. "Your last time extension just ran out. Go get some real clothes on that pregnant belly of yours. Wash your face. Take a shower. Try to wash off your infidelity if you can. See if you can find some guilt to feel sorry about. You are going to talk, and you are going to confess." I stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the walls. I made coffee to occupy my hands. I wondered if I could control my anger. "Susan," I yelled down the hall to her. "When I am ready, I will call for you to come to the table. You will obey me. I am through with being Mr. Good Guy. Do not show yourself until I command." I was shocked at myself. I was shaking in fear and anger. I knew this was the worst day of my life. I walked around the kitchen doing nothing except staring at the gurgling coffee maker. I was in a state of shock. Collapsing in a chair, I just tried to die, but it didn't work. Reality was still there. I pinched myself but didn't wake up. I got up, grabbing a glass and threw it at the back door, smashing it into 10,000 shards and destroying the glass in the door. I felt worse. I was trying to be rational, but it wasn't working. She had been right on at least that point. When I finally knew the truth, my emotions were going to ruin our life together. Mine certainly, and probably hers. Pouring a cup of coffee, I drank it rapidly. It burned my lips and tongue as it went down. I didn't care. Maybe if my tongue burned, I couldn't say the things my mind was thinking about her. Finally, I cooled down a bit, finished serving the coffee and the toast, and called loudly and angrily my soon-to-be ex-wife to the table. She was dressed as usual in that awful drab tint dress. She was somber and told me she was scared of me. I told her she better go put on something decent. She deserved the whipping of a lifetime, but I wasn't up to administering it. She had to look decent for this important meeting with me. I was no damn social scientist academician. She was to get dressed properly. I just knew our marriage was over. I saw no hope anymore. This was the last straw. My heart was broken and hardening against her. I had dreaded this moment, hoping against hope that it would not occur. I had plucked the last petal, and it was a "she loves me not" petal. The innocence of that childhood game of picking petals crashed over me. The tsunami of all fears crashed over me. My death had been confirmed. I could not avoid a confrontation with her now. It was upon me, here and now, and I had to deal with it. I didn't expect her to be of any help except to tell me what had happened down there. She hurried to our bedroom and soon returned in a nightgown with a robe wrapped around her. "My old clothes don't fit me anymore, so this is all I have to wear for you now." She was somber as she whispered those words in apparent fear. She then sat quietly, very subdued and looking very tired, staring at the wall behind me. I didn't care. "Did you know you were pregnant?" I asked. "Yes, I did a home test the day I got back and it was positive." "So you knew and wouldn't tell me? You hid it from me. Is that right?" "Yes, I just couldn't deal with it then. Abortion was out of the question for me. I had to complete my thesis. The major reason of the urgency for getting it all done right away was that I knew I was going to have to deal with you about my pregnancy and our marriage. I needed my degree in the event you threw me out, or I decided to leave you. Last night I decided to begin talking to you today about everything that happened down there. I wasn't going to take the week you gave me. Well, this is a damn good time to start. Right now I am really angry at you. Maybe I understand a little more about why you were in such a hurry to complete your thesis. But you lied to me and that hurts me deeply. You would never lie to me before. So now you have learned how to lie, how to be an adulteress, and how to kill a marriage. You really did learn a lot doing your research." I spit on the table between us. Put hubby in despair. "Is that what I get out of you, PhD?" My anger got the best of me. I was furious. I had never been this angry. I was ashamed of myself, and she was shaming me too. "You were right, Susan. My anger would have boiled over earlier, and your thesis and degree might very well have been delayed or in serious jeopardy." She just sat there staring at the wall or the floor, fidgeting with her hands. "So get on with it," I growled. "Evan, it is very complicated. Let me tell you that I think my pregnancy is the result of assault. Actually, it was a series of assaults that began the week after I was taken in. Of course, I can't be sure exactly when the pregnancy began, as I have had many forced and later voluntary sexual contacts with Henry. He is the head of the family. No one defies him. Henry and I had sex over the entire 2 months I was there. He told me if I didn't submit, he would simply assault me, so I had to submit. I couldn't even find a way to escape and leave. His other wives kept close watch on me. The sheriff is his brother, so I couldn't sneak out. They would have called him and then returned me, and I would surely have been beaten and assaulted and tied up until I submitted. I had no choice." She began to sob. My anger suddenly dissipated considerably. If she had been assaulted, then this was a totally different situation. I had heard stories of this type thing happening but never believed any of them. Such low-life people just didn't exist in America. Now I had scientific evidence that at least one existed. Silently I planned to seek revenge, but right now I needed my wife to tell me everything. "I am sorry you got assaulted," I ventured in a conciliatory tone. "But that doesn't explain why you won't have marital relations with me. Even worse, it doesn't explain your later voluntary sexual relations with him. Nor does it explain your dress habits. Nor does it explain your secrecy. There has to be more to this than just the assault thing. Keep on talking, I ordered firmly. This marriage is still on the rocks, but not at an end yet. You are at least redeeming yourself a little. She continued to cry. I wasn't sure it was her heart hurting, or the fact that she had got caught prematurely. I hoped it was both. I am trying to tell you, Ethan, this is so difficult right now. I had planned to make this a 3-part series of discussions which would lead up to where we are now, but you short-circuited my best intentions to start telling you today in an orderly fashion. Now I have to work backwards to where I had carefully planned to begin telling you. Please let me begin where I intended to start. I will tell you everything. I promise to tell you everything. Just let it be in the order I have so carefully planned. She looked at me. Her eyes pleaded with me, and my heart gave in. I had a hard time hating her. Okay, you must tell me everything, and it must include everything now. No 3-part thing stretched over 3 weeks or so. It has to be right now. It's everything now. Is that clear? Yes, everything today, I promise. Susan, before you go any farther, I need to tell you that I have been snooping around. I have talked to your major professor. I have copies of everything on your computer. I can investigate everything you say. You have this one and only opportunity to be honest with me. I am going to record this conversation from here on out, so I won't get anything mixed up later. With that, I went to my desk and retrieved my tape recorder along with several tapes, the microphone and electrical cord. I placed the microphone and recorder on the table between us and turned it on. I called my boss and took off the rest of the day. I disconnected the house phone. I willed there to be no interruptions by phones. Neighbors were not expected either. Give me your cell phone, Susan. She went and got it from her den. I turned it off and put it in my pocket. Then I turned mine off, putting it in my other pocket. Susan began her story. Let me tell you about where I came from. I have never told you that, and you have never made serious inquiry. I haven't wanted to talk about it. I have not been dishonest with you on that or anything else. That is, up until I began being secretive these past 5 months. My mother was a 4th wife of one of these families in a family such as I researched in southern Utah. She became very upset at one point with her and their lifestyles. She barely escaped with me when I was only 11. Evan, I grew up in a perv family down there. My mom decided that I was not going to have that happen to me. I don't know where she learned it wasn't a normal thing in the outside world. One evening, she ran away with me. I remember it so clearly. We left everything. We had only the clothes we were wearing. We tossed the tools. We had been working in the fields some miles from the house. It was turning dark and the other wives and children were walking back. When the rain came, they began to hurry and lost contact with me and Mom. Mom grabbed me, fled the opposite direction down the country road. I was scared. We hurried and stumbled along in the dark over 10 miles that night. At dawn, we had to hide in a boxcar on a siding for she knew the sheriff would be out looking for us. Well, the boxcar got hooked up and we were off and free in a matter of hours. I remember how I was so hungry and thirsty. When the train finally stopped, we jumped. We were at a highway junction. A motorist picked us up and took us to a Salvation Army woman's shelter. From there, we finally got situated in Colorado. Mom got a job, an apartment, and I got into school. We managed. You and I met at university, and the rest you know. Mom never dated or got remarried. She said she had had enough of male domination and humiliation at the hands of an all-powerful husband. Actually, she had never been legally married. At least the state of Utah has no record of her marriage. That makes me an illegitimate child legally. Can we stop for now and go for a walk together and not talk about this anymore for a few minutes? I agreed as my legs were also cramped. Her story was fascinating and my anger had diminished, but there was more to come, of that I was sure. During the brisk walk, she accepted my hand to hold for the first time in the months since she came back at home. Once we were back at the house, we sat at the table again, staring at each other or into space. We now had a pitcher of cold water, some grapes and apples plus 2 glasses to help us occupy our hands. She began. You can see how my academic interests were influenced by my childhood. I wanted an adult view of life in that society. Now the more difficult part starts. Please just listen as best you can. I know this next part, part 2, if you please, is going to be much more difficult for you to hear. I'll be as complete as I believe you will want. You can ask questions when I am through, and I will answer them fully. I am not going to withhold anything from you anymore. The need for withholding is past, and the need for total honesty is here. With this, she pushed back in her chair and took a sip of water. Ethan, I have carefully rehearsed this many times, and now I hope to get it in order and correct in content. When I went to this town, the closest I could get by public transportation was only bus stop about 10 miles away. Having been there before, I contacted an acquaintance who agreed to take me the last 10 miles by car to my targeted town. I had buried a good amount of cash near the bus station, fearing that I, like my mother, might need it. I took only $1,000 in cash with me. I had my laptop and had previously programmed it to access the internet. I could not use our home internet as it was not available down there. A family had tentatively agreed to put me up for a few days while I made arrangements for the longer stay I needed. You should know that the family I stayed with is part of my childhood family of origin. They were expecting me to return sometime. The town is the town of my childhood. I had been there on my preliminary scouting expeditions, so I was not a totally unknown entity. I knew my way around town and the countryside. Many of the people remembered me as a child, even though I had been gone for 15 years. Even then, my return was viewed with same suspicion and distrust that every outsider coming to town was viewed. Gaining trust was essential to my research. As you know, these people have a deep and natural distrust of outsiders. I could not tell them I was on a research project, or I would have been given the door immediately and quite unceremoniously for certain. Even though I was family, I was received with considerable suspicion. Especially the head of the family, Henry, had serious doubts about letting me stay even overnight. His 3 wives were only a little more hospitable initially. The 9 children took to me quite well even from the beginning. One daughter, Rebecca, who was 11, became very close to me. We bonded quickly and I learned so much from her. She gave me the child's view of their culture. Her insight brought back so many memories of my own childhood experiences. She was so open in discussing her feelings. I shared so much with her about the outside life of children her age. She was fascinated. She had to promise me not to tell anyone that I had told her about the outside life. The first day, I was greeted by the man of the family at the roadside. Henry is his name. He is a tall man pushing 50 now. He must be at least 6 feet 5 inches tall and a good 260 pounds of all muscle. He works the fields like most of the other men. As a result, he is very strong and very rugged. Actually, he is quite handsome. He has a full beard. His hands are massive and calloused by his hard work. His body is deeply tanned from the scorching sunlight. His arms are hairy. I could see the hair on his chest above the no-collared work shirt he was wearing. He was obviously a very strong man physically. In demeanor and countenance, he is a man who is in total charge of his life and his family. He is a man who cannot be intimidated. He was used to total compliance. No one else was allowed to greet outsiders but the man of the house. We talked for quite a while at roadside before my friends in the car were waved on to return to the outside world. I told Henry that it was my intent to live peacefully among them, living as they do for a month or so. This would allow us each to decide if my return was to be permanent. I had said permanent in order to stay any time at all and to ingratiate myself to him. I had no intention to stay longer than the time needed to get my research done. Henry told me in very specific terms that there were rules that had to be obeyed without question even if I were to stay only overnight. No murmuring or suggesting changes in any form would be tolerated. Especially, I was not to speak favorably to the children or his wives of the outside world. That was a paramount sin in the community. He looked at my hands and my wedding ring and said I had to take the rings off as a part of his accepting me into his home. Reluctantly, I took off the ring. I told him I wanted to keep it, but would not wear it. He forced me to give it to him. He promised to return it when I left. I had to agree or walk the 10 miles back that night. He then inquired as to what was in my backpack. I told him it contained my clothes, personal things, and my computer. He would not allow the computer. He took it and very unceremoniously bashed it with a hoe and threw it in the garbage hole at the back of the house. He took my purse and found the $1,000. He took this saying women were not allowed money in this town and certainly not in his house. There would be nothing to contaminate his home. Now I was glad I had hidden cash in the flower bed beside the bus station. It was now painfully obvious that I was going to be more captive than free. Because I needed to do the research and because I needed his approval and knowledge and support, I agreed to all terms he had and all future terms as long as I was his guest. Honey, she looked at me directly, the loss of my computer is the cause of my seclusion back here at home. I had to resurrect all the details from memory and enter them into my home computer. Everything depended on my remembering what I would have otherwise recorded on the computer. I wasn't sure I could remember everything. I had to do a lot of quiet thinking to remember everything correctly. I had to remember not only facts, but my emotional reactions to the life there. It was all part of my research. I had incredible anxiety about that both down there and again back here. Please try to understand. That part of the anxiety is now over, but that was only a minor part of my anxiety. She continued almost like reading from a book. I agreed to abide by all the rules of the community, his family, and his religion without voicing any disagreement. In other words, I was not to disrupt their family life in any way. That fit perfectly into my research. Now you may be wondering why he made an exception for me, as an outsider, to be in his home and in staying his town. The only reason I was allowed in was because Henry was a relative. Henry and I are not related by blood, but by family ties only. He is 20 years my senior. I am the youngest of all the children of that family. Henry became head of the family when my father passed on. The other wives also died. Henry took a first wife, then 2 more in rapid succession. I am 12 years younger than Henry's 3rd wife. Well, I was finally invited into the house and introduced to his wives and children. I was afforded a small bed in the attic with the other wives. Like all the other men of households, Henry slept in a large downstairs bedroom. The children slept upstairs with us also. The wives took total care of the children. My rules of conduct were very simple and plainly outlined. I was to work like the other women. I was to dress as they dress. I was to behave and obey as they did. The first wife would tell me what to do. She was to see to it that I had the necessities that were needed, like clothing, shoes, and work utensils. She would make my daily work assignments. I was to give deference to her until told otherwise. I agreed. I took my small suitcase upstairs. The first wife inspected it. The first thing she saw was the birth control pills. She asked me what kind of disease I had that required daily pills. Of course, I told her what the pills were and what they were used for. She took them and disposed of them by throwing them out the window. "You have to be like us," she told me. "No medicines without Henry's approval. I know these are not approved under any circumstance. The pills are unnatural and against God's will." I could not protest but figured I would not need them. I was given a dress to wear. All underwear had to be pure white and made of pure cotton, so my underclothing was taken and burned ceremonially. There is something in their religion about the kind of underwear they have to wear. The outside world could not contaminate their holy home. The first wife went through my suitcase for other contraband. I lost my lipstick, deodorant, perfume, hankies, Tylenol, and of course my birth control pills. I could live by the rules or leave that night. Since you and I were not together, I felt that the loss of the birth control pills would not be a terrible loss, as I fully intended to be faithful to you. I could start them when I got back home. We had a simple but nutritious evening meal, and I participated in cleaning up. I slept well that night, hoping that my acceptance into this family would provide me with the opportunity to research my project. If I was successful, I would be the first to do this type of inside observation, hopefully without male dominance interference, while observing the inner workings of the family and their town. I soon worked into a routine. The other wives were at first suspicious, but gradually I gained their confidence. As a result, they began to be more open to my confidential one-on-one times. It was during these times that a ton of information became available. The children shared freely also. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to keep a diary. As a result, I had to commit to memory much of what would have been written. Now I hope you can see why I needed to have so much privacy and secrecy after I returned here. I truly regret having to do this to you, but it was the only way I could think of to get my memory into written form. She took another sip of water and munched on the grapes. My thoughts were myriad. My observations were categorized in my mind as she went along. I jotted down some notes for future questions. At the beginning of my second week, he called a family conference in which only he and his wives were allowed to participate. I was not allowed to attend. He announced that I had fit in very well and that he was going to take me as his 4th wife. Neither the wives nor I had a voice in the matter. He simply announced that God had given him a 4th wife. The first wife came upstairs and told me the news. I was terribly shocked. This could not be. This was impossible. I was already married. This made no difference to any of them. Henry had said God had given him a revelation for another wife, and since I was living under his roof, it was obvious that I was to be his 4th wife. No disagreeing with God or Henry. I would do as I was told to do. Naturally, I went downstairs immediately and disagreed verbally with protestations of the legality and morality of his simply taking me without my agreement. He got very belligerent. I saw the other wives shrink back in fear. He grabbed me painfully by the arm and dragged me into his bedroom. I looked for help from the other wives, but got none. He waved them away. They just turned and went to their beds upstairs. They could not object, as this was their religion and lifestyle, much less facing Henry's physical retribution. I pleaded with him. He was adamant and so very much stronger than I. It was useless to resist. He disrobed me with threats of violence if I screamed. I cowed in fear and asked him, "Please not do assault me." Then he assaulted me. He lay down beside me and told me that I would learn to love and respond to him. He told me that his other wives had been instructed to keep a close eye on me, and if I gave any hint of rebellion, he would deal severely with me. If they failed to report anything to him, they would be severely disciplined. He tolerated no disobedience. He pointed to switches and sticks, ropes and paddles that he kept in his room. "Honey," she spoke softly to me now. He was deadly serious about my fate. He dismissed me to my bed upstairs and to the watchful eyes of his other wives. I cried the rest of the night to myself. There was no one to console me. The next morning at the breakfast table, he announced to the children that I had become his fourth wife and should be treated with respect just as his other wives were. He said all the children had now a fourth mother and I had a happy family to live in. All his children would now be part of my family duties and responsibilities. I was now just another of his wives, his fourth wife. The other 3 wives had children by him, and I was so worried that I would become pregnant as a result of his assaults that first night. I tried to think of alternatives, but had none. From there on, I was a captive. He had one of his wives each night. Each night he would threaten me, and then have dominating sex. He told me to learn to be his submissive, and I would learn to enjoy having sex with him. This became a routine. Gradually, I came to accept my role as his submissive sex partner. I began to forget about my gentle sex life with you. The dom and sub-sex roles actually became enjoyable, and I began to look forward to our times together. I really miss that now. It is really different feeling. I loved it. These were things we had never thought of or done, and they were very sexually satisfying. He was right. I came to enjoy sex like I had never enjoyed it before. He never had to tie me down again. The other wives confirmed that they too were sexually satisfied. After several weeks, he told me he saw how I was beginning to enjoy life with him. I had to agree and didn't feel like the prisoner I really was. All the time I was making mental notes of what I learned from him and the children and the other wives. I was assigned home duties while the other wives had to work the fields with him. My research seemed farther and farther away. After the first month, we went as a family to visit other families in the town. I was finally allowed out of his house. He knew them all. He introduced me as his fourth wife. I was required to step up to one step behind him and bow to the other families. No one could walk with him or in front of him. Even the children knew to stay well behind him. He was a true dominant. He worked hard and provided the simple necessities of life and required us to work hard also. Life was secure even if not free or equal. He learned that I had a teaching certificate. He praised God loudly. The community needed a certified teacher to help in the homeschooling the children underwent. I was assigned the role of developing lesson plans for the various grades. All my work had to have the approval of the town council, of which he was a member. Only men served on the council. My outlines and lesson plans had to conform to their ideas of family, religion, race, the role of men and women and children in their society. I learned about their fierce independence from all outside political and law enforcement authorities. I learned of their economic system within the community. Barter was the trade of choice and the relative value of pigs, an ear of corn, and a sewing needle. Henry told me that all the husbands were supposed to treat their wives sexually like he treated his wives. My experience in my appointed role was perfect for my research. I accumulated so much information it was unbelievable to me. I had now been accepted into their home and community without prejudice once I was known as a submissive wife to a church and town leader. "Let me go pee before I continue," she requested. I agreed as I had to go also. With that, she left. She seemed to be totally absorbed back into this experience. I was in knots and fits internally as I listened in fascination and horror. I was listening to a talking book about a fictitious land. She didn't have to describe her sex with that guy. I think she was rubbing it in that I was only average. Why is she bragging about it now? I seemed to be talking to someone I didn't know. She was not my wife, but just another person relating a story to me. I was absorbed in her narration. She talked in a monotone with very little emotion. Obviously, her rehearsals had been effective in reducing her emotional responses. She had disconnected herself from her story. As she talked, I had become more and more like a disinterested third party, listening to a fascinating story from a stranger, one having no relationship to my reality as husband. I tried to disconnect so my anger wouldn't spill over. When she returned, she wanted to continue without a question and answer period. She assured me that I would have all my questions answered in due time today. I agreed as I was making notes and trying to control my emotions. I wondered if perhaps her refusal to act like a wife to me for the last 5 months had something to do with her need to disconnect her emotions from her recent traumatic history. She sat down again, this time with a notebook. I have written some notes over the past weeks to help me with the next part of this difficult discussion. First, I want you to know I have always loved you, and always will. The way I love you has changed, as you are quite aware. Be assured of my love for you. I want to tell you now why and how I left his family. It was the 12th birthday of his female daughter, Rebecca, that I had come to be so close to. This lovely, innocent child and I had formed very close bonds. The entire family had a very nice party for her. Her biologic mother had had a serious talk with her the night before. Rebecca was unusually quiet and withdrawn, something that was incongruous with a birthday party. As the party progressed, she seemed more withdrawn. She had friends a year older than she. She seemed even more distraught after talking in private with them. As the party was coming to a close and the cake had been eaten, the adults gathered their children and they all left en masse as if on a prearranged nonverbal clue. We were left alone as a family. After everyone cleaned up, the other children were sent to their respective rooms. I knew he was going to be in bed all night with his first wife and would not be paying any attention to anything else. If I were to escape, that night was a golden opportunity. I had more than enough information to complete my research. At that moment, I determined to leave. I took the only remaining thing I had from when I had entered, my credit card, which I had carefully hidden under the insole of my outside shoes that had been carefully stored under my bed. I had not worn them since the day I entered. Work shoes had been issued to me. I waited until the other wives seemed asleep. I gathered my coats, put on my outside shoes, and sneaked out the door. I could hear Henry talking to his first wife in soothing tones. I closed the door quietly on my life and my research family. I left a note to Henry telling him I had to leave to get my research published. That was the first he would know about it. I thanked him for taking me into his family. I thought I might still need his goodwill at some point, especially if I were caught escaping. There was a good moon just rising, so I had light enough to walk the road I had walked once before with my mother some 15 years ago. I hurried as I needed to be out of the county by dawn when my absence would be discovered. I ran and walked, my mind in turmoil. I had enjoyed the lifestyle. Now I was focused on completing my research as soon as possible. I had to leave every emotion behind in order to record my findings as accurately as possible. After walking almost 8 miles, I was so tired I was going to collapse. The sky was now coming alive with light as a car drove by. I was able to catch a ride into the small town where the bus station was. The driver was not a member of the sect, so I would not be reported. I went around to the back of the bus depot building. By digging in the flower bed, amazingly I retrieved the plastic sandwich bag containing the money I had stashed away months ago. You know the rest. Ethan, let me remind you that there was no electricity in the house I lived in. No telephone either. No radio or TV, and no electronic games for the children to play with. The setting was entirely rural, and the culture was right out of the early 18th century. I came directly home and started putting down my experiences into the computer. At first, my writings were all mixed up. I just began writing as thoughts and recollections came to mind. Later, I was able to put dates to these and organize them into my thesis. Thank goodness for word processors, or I would still be at it this time next year. I thought this needed my total dedication and isolation from mind-changing emotional experiences like sex with you. Now, my dear husband, comes the even harder part. Shall I continue, or do you want to ask questions about what I have told you already? I opted for more listening. I had a feeling that my marriage was already over and irretrievable, so I might as well hear her out. She continued, I have had time to reflect on the two lifestyles I have experienced. They are quite different and based upon very different societal rules and expectations. To be truthful, each has its own drawbacks and beautiful aspects. Frankly, I am very attracted to the rural communal life. The issue of multiple wives has certain very good aspects. This is covered in my soon-to-be published thesis. Incidentally, I am also writing a novel based on my experiences. Already I have a $50,000 deposit as a result of providing the publisher with an overview, chapter headings, and the first chapter. As you can see, I have been very busy these past few months. I jotted down to ask her just where that money was. Ethan, she continued, the wives got along very well. There seemed to be no real disaffection to their joint husband. Actually, there was a bit of competition as to who could satisfy him best. The issue that made my mother and me run away now, after several months of reflection, seems to be not as serious as I once thought when my mind was being driven by my emotions. I think it is important that everyone fit into their culture if they are to be happy. I was terribly turned off by this at first, but now I can accept it even though I know the outside society in which you live, and I used to live in exclusively, disagrees. Each culture has its own norms to live by. Some cultures wear no clothes at all, remember? I interrupted. Do you mean that assaulting doesn't turn you off anymore? That's not just sick, it's evil. She continued as if I had said nothing. Guess she didn't want to get off her script. Let me address the issue of not having marital relations with you. I know this is a real bone of contention with you. I am truly saddened. I have wanted to tell you why, but up until now, I was sure you would fly off your handle. If you did that, then I would also, in the ensuing battle of personalities, would have set my research back several weeks. Obviously, Henry has not enjoyed sex with me since I left. I wanted to keep the multiple sexual encounters with him fresh in mind, so having sex with you would most likely make me forget the details of our intimacies, which I truly did enjoy. In an attempt to keep my memory clear, I had to refuse sex with you. When you first returned, the nausea that the pregnancy caused made me less interested in sex. As time went by, I began to understand that I was truly married to two very different cultures represented by two very different men who both love me in very different ways. I could not continue this way. In the outside society in which you live, I am married to you. We make tender, slow, cuddly love. I have truly enjoyed those times and have no regrets. You are an ideal husband for this culture. In the town where I lived as the fourth wife, I was the submissive while he was the dominant. I came to enjoy that style of lovemaking also. In fact, it is far superior. I knew you could never treat me in that way. You are too gentle a person for that. Believe me, going without sex for these months has not been easy on me either. I have craved it, but I crave the wild, sex with Henry. I have to do something soon about this dilemma. My thesis is completed and the pressure from that is relieved. I have to make a very crucial decision concerning my state of marriage. Who am I going to be married to? More importantly, which of these different societies and cultures do I choose to live in? Obviously, I cannot live in both, nor be married to both you and Henry. He would not tolerate me giving myself to you. If I choose to return to him, I have to not have had sex with anyone else when I return. That would be infidelity to him. I am pregnant by him. I am unsure that you can accept this child as one of your own if I choose to live outside with you. You have some right to believe that I was not true to you. Remember, though, that it all started with assault. I believe this child is the product of that assault. You noticed that I am wearing your wedding band. I got it back from Henry when he took me as his fourth wife. He said I had to wear a wedding band and he didn't need to buy one as he had my ring already. It was only considerably later that I willingly and eagerly engaged in dom and sub-sexual activity with Henry. The sex with him, after the first couple of weeks, was exciting and totally new to me. I loved it. I voluntarily told him I loved him and loved the sex with him. I told him I had come back home to find out for myself if my mother had been wrong for leaving. I am now convinced she had been wrong. I tried to show my love for that life culture by dressing in their clothing. The tranquility of the ancient lifestyle, the closeness to Mother Nature, the dependence on each other, and the dominant protective male showed how life could be lived happily. I was disappointed that the other wives had not experienced the outside life and been able to actually choose their culture as I could. They couldn't freely adopt the communal lifestyle since they had no experience in the outside culture like I had had. I have experienced the good and bad of both. Our society suffers from a superficial existence. This outside society is dominated by acquisition of things rather than nurturing relationships. Now that my degree is assured, I can reflect on my future rationally. The challenge of teaching in that little town is something I can thoroughly enjoy. Being Henry's loving and caring fourth wife is something I have and am giving careful consideration to. My decision is between you and this outside society or him and his society and culture. This is not an easy decision. I love the academic life and will miss that when, or if, I return. True, now that I sneaked out, he may not take me back. That is a risk I have to take. I have been able to communicate with him through the friends I have in the nearby community. He is willing to forgive me and take me back, but I will have to do penance. He is also demanding that I bring, in cash, the equivalent of what I would have contributed to the family while I am not there. He will not accept me back under any circumstance if I am not back immediately after receiving my PhD. Continuing on in my life with you in this society is my other option. I will need time to make that decision, but I have to choose soon or lose the option of returning to Henry as his fourth wife. I ask you to give me that time. Susan narrowed her eyes as she said, I have told my thesis committee every detail. I left out nothing to them. I even told them how I had learned to enjoy the dom and sub relationship. They know I am pregnant. It means nothing to them academically, and what they think of me personally is trivia to me. The PhD is what I was going for, and now I am going to get it. Now I am willing to answer any and all of your questions. I just hope you will be civil to me as I have been to you all day long. I sat quietly for a moment in deep contemplation. My mind came into order rather rapidly. I realized that I had no need of the information taken neither from her computer nor from the grant accounting file. The tape recorder needed to be hanged, so I did it. The tapes would be better than anything I could get anywhere else. I was unsure if I was more stoic or angry. What I had was a deep anger and a need for separation from this whole situation. I took a deep breath, looked straight into her staring eyes and spoke, working hard to control my temper. You have forgotten several things in your decision-making for your future. You know about the statistical decision tree. You have used it before, just as we have used it together. Opportunities bring the need for decisions. Decisions have consequences, both positive and negative. These consequences do not have equal probabilities of occurring. You know all this. Why didn't you use this statistical tool in your decision-making? You have been acting foolishly. Your mind is confused by your emotions, and you don't even see it. You have left out your most important consequence. You have not considered me. You have kept me out of your life so long that me and my feelings and emotions are no longer factors in your decision-making. You have both forgotten and willingly trashed your wedding vows to me, to your family, and to God. Do I not remember accurately your promising to have and to hold me and me only, for better or for worse, forsaking all others until death do us part? Yet you have taken another lover, a husband, and bear his child. What more obvious could you have done to destroy me and our once beautiful marriage? You have pushed me out of your life. Your option for remaining as my wife is no longer a valid option. I have decided that our marriage no longer exists. These months of isolation, secrecy, and now the revelation of total infidelity to me have destroyed the us. No, my dearest wife, your option to continue being married to me is just as much my option as yours. I choose no. Our marriage is now a no option to you. You destroyed your own option. You have no future with me. Tomorrow I will see a divorce lawyer. Your options are limited to bad or worse. One is you could try to go back to Henry, your real man. Your second husband, in that wretched, evil town, might take you back. Of course, your third option is still open. You could take the path your mother took and raise your child without a father. Of course, there is the fourth and a final option. You could kill yourself and your scumsucker child. That's a very bad one. Maybe someday, if you choose to not go back to your real man, you can find another sucker like me to be a parasite on. Your child is not mine, and I will not support you or it. I won't help you make any of your options come true. You are on your own there. You can still earn a good living and support yourself and the results of your adultery. You do not need me, and you will not have me for emotional or financial support ever again. You haven't needed me for months. You have tortured me for 5 months. If you choose to remain outside, as you put it, you will do so without my assistance or companionship. My past, present, and future with you are all dead. Our relationship is dead, mind you. You killed it. We have no future. Knowing what I know, I would never remarry you after we divorce. You chose your research rather than your husband. You chose infidelity over fidelity. You chose lies over truth. You apparently have chosen adultery with Henry over your marriage vows. You have trashed me, my manhood, my marriage, and some of my pocketbook. You never gave me a chance to compete, and I would not have taken it if you had. When we put these wedding bands on, that meant neither of us was available to anyone else. Neither would ever have to be competitive for the other's love, support, and sexual intimacy. You have used me and my income for support while you make wild sex, give your heart to another, and get pregnant as a result. So this man you are choosing expects me to pay him a dowry to take you off my hands? I laughed a harsh, angry laugh. Just how in hell do you think I am going to do that? I have my own grant money. I have enough in hand to get back in with it if I go back by July. I can still file for what remains of my grant money. I have the down payment on my novel also. That surely will be enough, was her angry answer. You don't need to dip into your precious bank account to fund me. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Susan, you have used me. You have really used me, not loved me. My hard work has funded your adultery via your research. Your grant covered your tuition and academic fees. Everything else I have paid for by my income, which I shared with you without any questions. You have not only been sexually infidel, but you have been financially infidel. Now I wonder if you didn't just marry me so you could live your own life and get your degree more easily. I have been nothing more than a step stool in your climb to your own goals. I see clearly what you have done. You have broken my heart, and apparently you could care less for doing so. You even lied to when you told me loved me just a little while ago. That has to be the mother of all lies, and it came out of the mouth of the only woman I ever loved. Susan, I have lost any desire to even be around you. She winced and shook her head. Ethan, I had nothing but love for you all these years. I had hoped that you would accept me. I am torn inside also. My heart is divided. I wanted you to show me how much you loved me by remaining faithful to me these past months without all your complaining and constant bitching. You lost out by letting your emotions go into free fall, spiraling our marriage onto the rocks. I threw back at her. Your heart is divided, but mine is broken. You broke it, and you can't fix it. You promised me to never let another man into it. I don't think you know what love or fidelity is. So you wanted me to show my love for you by accepting your adultery? I yelled at her. You wanted me to love you so much that when you chose to leave me, it would hurt even more. What kind of monster have you become? He is a monster. You have become like him. You deserve each other. Are you sure you are really in love with a domineering monster male? I was furious again. She had confided all this to a group of her academic peers, but she had refused to share it with me. Truly, I knew that I was, and probably always had been only a sideline in her life. Susan, my anger was evident as was the hurt. Are you going back to him? Do you know what your penance will be? Of course not. He is not going to tell you he is going to flog you half to death to teach you a lesson and to show his other wives that they'd better toe his line or suffer the same terrible consequences. You escaped once. That won't happen again. If you go back, you will die there, sooner or later, but probably sooner. If he kills you, will be buried in a pigsty, and your death will be recorded as natural causes. I wager his beating you to death is considered the man's right and duty to an erring wife, according to his religion. I can assure you your torture won't be easy or short. Most likely you will be flogged in front of all the wives in the town, and then taken home to be further beaten. Any man who will demand a dowry, who assaulted you, will certainly take pleasure in teaching everyone a terrible lesson of dominance and submission. They don't believe in the outside doctors, so don't expect to get your broken bones fixed. Very likely, you will lose your pregnancy as a result of the beatings. You better find out what your penance involves before putting your life and the life of your unborn child at serious risk. I'll have no part of that or of you. Of course, I had no way of knowing if anything I said was true or not. I just wanted to degrade her and scare her. I wasn't thinking of any kind of loving rehabilitation or marriage resolution. I was angry at being taken. As you so succinctly told me, I can take care of myself. Well, you will surely find out if you go back. You told me he was a very strong physical specimen who could and would dominate you with the approval of the community. You better be very careful if you value your life and the life of his child. He will have no guilt in killing you or even his unborn child growing in your womb. I had heard of women escaping from the darkness and evil of their culture. I could understand that. But how could an intelligent person such as Susan, a person who knew of freedom and equality and opportunity, willingly choose to return? Surely she was mentally ill. I could think of no other reason for her even considering a return. Was a monster domineering male that attractive that she would turn her back on her marriage vows, her husband, her family, and her freedom? How had this evil possessed her? I got up and walked around the now darkened room. The sun had set on planet Earth and on my marriage. Susan, I muttered, this morning I was only angry at you. Tonight I am tired of you and washed out. I am a defeated person. I am numb inside. I am feeling some anger still, but sorrow, sadness, personal defeat as a man and as a husband has overwhelmed me. Isolation surrounds me. Nevertheless, I am feeling some sense of release from the hell you have kept me in. At least now I have closure on this part of my life. Now all I have to do is figure out what I am going to do tonight and the tomorrows that follow. How I will get on with my life without you is my only concern now. You no longer exist to me. You and your concerns are no longer a part of me. This latter I spoke quietly in despair. The emotional drain took over, and I felt 100 years old. I had been royally screwed and rejected by the one I had loved so dearly. Somehow I didn't care like I had this morning. My heart was broken and would not heal. I didn't even feel like attacking her. All I wanted was for this to be over with. I wanted her out of my life entirely. I wanted to forget everything about her and everything about my ever knowing her. To remember nothing would be better than to remember anything at all about her. She just sat there. She said nothing. When I left, she was still sitting in the same position, staring at the wall behind where I had been sitting. I walked out to exercise by fast walking and slow thinking. I had unfinished business. She had created her own punishment, but there was a man yet to feel the wrath of a capable and dedicated outsider whom he had crossed. My intelligence, expertise, and worldwide contacts were to be pitted against a strong-willed, heavily muscled, uneducated giant living in isolation from modern technology. I willed to take no hostages. If we both perish, so be it, but he surely would go first. There would be justice applied. To this I dedicated myself. I slept on the couch. Early the next morning I called in for 2 weeks personal family leave. Susan had gotten up and fixed coffee. Susan, I said, enjoy the coffee. You won't get any after you go back. There will be 1,000 other things you won't enjoy, but you will have all the dominant sex. Of course, you can raise your child in isolation from the world. Enjoy your life. Susan, you can take care of yourself, I'm sure. Haha, we will be soon divorced. You can keep your $50,000 deposit, but remember, once you're back to your real man, your research and publishing days are over. This house is going to be mine and mine only. Your name may be on the title with mine, but I have made all the payments. No judge will give you an interest in it, as long as you keep your 50 grand. I won't let you have your real man and any piece of this house too. That will happen only over my dead body. It goes on the market today. I had plans for her real man that I wasn't going to her or anyone about. You better make preparations for living somewhere else. I am moving my stuff to the corporate apartment this afternoon. I'll get the rest soon. This house should sell easily. I am going to be legally free from you as I am now finally emotionally free. I will send you the name of my divorce lawyer in case you need to talk to me. From here on, we talk to lawyers, not directly to the other. Here is your cell phone. I packed in silence without sharing coffee or another word. I took the tapes in case she and I got into a divorce fight. I was not going to say goodbye as I didn't see anything good about this situation. She had become a non-entity to me. Just a piece of furniture that would have to be moved when the house was sold. The darkness of the past 5 months was giving way to the dawn of a new day for me. I was off to the bank, to a realtor, to a divorce lawyer, then to my parents' house. I was going to retrieve something only I knew about that was stored in the attic. I had business to conduct, contacts to make, plans to refine, justice to administer, and then a new life to make for myself. I drove to corporate headquarters and got the apartment for 2 months. I was free at last. I hated it, but freedom comes with a high price. Crossing me the way Henry did was going to prove costly for him also. The next day was a flurry of new activities. I closed my bank account and savings account, moving everything to new accounts opened at another bank in the big city. Our credit card was canceled. I applied for a new one. I found a divorce lawyer in the city and arranged to see him the next afternoon. My boss knew of my marital troubles and offered whatever corporate assistance I might need. I told him all I needed was to send my paycheck to my new account and give me a couple of weeks off. If Susan called the secretaries, they should give Susan my new phone number at the apartment and I would handle her calls. That used up one whole day. The next day I drove down to my former home. Susan was not at home. I retrieved the tape recorder and the stack of tapes that still lay on the table. I retrieved the rest of my books, files, clothes, tools, pictures, personal items, and my cello. I called the realtor to give them my new address and phone number. They told me that they could not list my house for sale without Susan's signature also. Well, she could live there. Let her pay the mortgage payments, mow the lawn, and fix the bathroom toilet that tended to stop up and run over at the most inconvenient time. I left Susan a note as to where I was with my new temporary phone number. She had my cell phone number if she wanted to contact me. I figured she would not want to talk to me. I told her I wanted to talk to her. I was not interested in discussing our pending divorce. It was about Henry and his daily activities that I wanted to talk to her about. The more one knows about the enemy, the more likely a successful strategy can be devised. I was a man on a mission now to see that Henry got his due for his part in breaking up my marriage. My focus on dispensing justice seemed to empower me with the energy I needed. The note was an impassioned plea for us to meet. I really did need her help in understanding Henry's mindset and daily activities to the minutest detail. While doing this, I had to treat her as part of the enemy camp. She was going to become the unwitting spy that would tell me everything I needed to know. The next stop was back to the city to see the divorce lawyer. Armed with the tapes and the computer disks from her computer, I told the lawyer what had happened. I told him I would not engage in any pre-divorce counseling. I was willing to talk to her, but not to a counselor. I wanted to split the estate 50-50ths, including the deposit money Susan had plus half the future proceeds from any publishing she did as a result of her time with her research community. I would not agree to alimony or child support. I demanded that she give up her married name of Allen and that the child would not be named neither Ethan nor Allen. She would not sully my name. I wrote out a hefty check off my new bank account. I didn't care that much. I knew freedom would be costly, but freedom is what I coveted. Freedom from Susan, freedom from the marriage, and freedom from hate. What I needed was a clear mind, so my entire efforts to effect justice on Henry would be a total success. Time was not urgent to me. Success was important. That night I got a call from Susan. She also wanted to talk. We arranged to meet for lunch at a diner in our former hometown the next day. That night, I slept well for the first time in months. I had focus, inner strength, determination, and a plan. Susan was history only. I packed enough for several days as I was going to visit my parents and her mother after seeing Susan. Susan and I met the next day at the diner. She was dressed in a modern prenatal dress. She wore a little makeup. She glowed like pregnant women do. She looked really good. I wish things had been different and the child had been mine. She looked so much better than the previous 5 months. Her cheek was badly bruised still. The waitress seated us at a table in a corner. The cafe was not crowded at lunchtime, so we had time before my planned drive east to her mother's place and then on to my parents' house in Colorado. I was very careful in my approach to Susan. I complimented her on coming back to the 21st century. Why she had done so was of no real interest to me. We were through as a couple. "Ethan," she began after we were seated and had ordered, "I want to apologize for the way I said things the other day." "Susan," I replied, "how you said it was about as gentle as you could be. The things you did, not the way you reported them, is the cause of our impending divorce. I am sure you know I can't live with what you have done. You will be receiving the divorce petition within the next few days. I believe you will agree to the terms. The divorce will give you the legal freedom to return to Henry or to live as a single mom. The divorce also will free me of any legal obligations to you and to Henry's child you will have. I can never absolve you or forgive you of the infidelity you have engaged in. What I want you to know is that I am trying hard not to hate you. There were mitigating circumstances. You were a prisoner, but you didn't try to get free or to fight him physically. Perhaps it is best you didn't fight him, but his first sex with you was not entirely like assault from a stranger who would then flee after killing you. My heart and mind is in confusion about what you told me. I want you to forgive me for the hateful things I said." Continuing before she could speak, "The reason I came here is to let you help me understand the life you led while you were there. I don't want to hear about sex. I want to hear about what time you got up, when you went to bed, where is the house you lived in, what type of work Henry does and where. I want to know the name of the community and its location. I have no interest in any of your intimate dealings with Henry or his other 3 wives." The waitress served us and we ate in silence until Susan finished. She took a drink of water, looked at me and said, "Ethan, I plan to go back to Henry within the next few days and see just what my situation is there. You actually scared me into thinking that Henry might actually beat me physically and emotionally. I don't think he will do that, but I need to talk to him about the terms of my return, should I choose to do that. I also need to know if our marriage, that is you and me, is really beyond repair. My heart is still divided between you and Henry." She knew how to punch my anger button. "Susan, I told you our marriage is over. Your heart-divided heart crushed mine. You're even considering another man is enough to break us up forever. Perhaps someday you will comprehend how deeply you have hurt me. Infidelity is not just sexual. Perhaps someday you will experience the abyss of infidelity in its purest form. I don't wish that on anyone, even you. Your ignorance is your bliss. I had exclusive rights to you. You trashed that in your quest for an academic degree and some wild sex. I guess you forgot that you had promised me your loyalty in front of your mother, my family, our friends, and God. You can be sure that I, Ethan Allen, no longer part of your future. I will do everything I can to see to that. This is not what I want to talk about. I wanted this time with you to learn of your activities, how you lived where you lived, who you shared outside duties with, things like that. Our relationship is not going to be part of this time we share today, or ever again. Any discussion related to you and me as a couple has to go through my lawyer." "Ethan," she tightened her rigid lips, "you don't have to be hateful. There is plenty of hate in this outside world to go around many times over. Let's get on with your telling me about the things I asked about, please." With that, she told me when they got up and went to bed, who in the family did what and when. I asked about daily schedules for the wives, children, and Henry. She really did tell me everything I wanted to know. I think I did not arouse any suspicions as to my plans for Henry. I certainly did not want Henry to become paranoid. That, of course, was ridiculous of me to even think. He was much too egotistical, arrogant, and domineering to even think of some chicken outsider coming after him. My mission in life, at this point, was exactly that. I learned that Henry was very religious. He read his holy scriptures daily, yet he was also superstitious. He believed in angels, visions, and visitations from heavenly beings. He was a proud man. He had sex frequently, more than once a day usually. Sometimes he would have 2 or 3 of his wives in one evening. Susan said she loved trying to keep up with him. I think she said that to goad me and humiliate me. She succeeded, but I didn't comment. Henry was a town leader, and the other men held him in high esteem for his aggressive sexual ways and domination of his family and wives. He hated men who were not dominant in their own families, but tolerated no interference in his own life or family. He was a control freak to me. I wondered what he thought of me. I dismissed that thought as it made no difference what he thought. He was just a pile of horse manure to me, so why should I care what he thought? I thought to myself that the high and mighty Henry had a hard fall coming. I remembered a scripture verse from my childhood. Pride comes before a fall. Certainly Henry was full of pride, and I was going to enjoy seeing his balloon deflated. I told Susan goodbye and wished her well with her talks with Henry. I did not offer my hand in parting. I had a 6-hour drive ahead of myself and would have to stay overnight somewhere. My first stop was to Susan's mother's house an hour's drive away. She was home from her school teaching job. She and I were on good terms, although not particularly close. She invited me in and was surprised to see me, but also seemed happy. I had her sit at her kitchen table with some fruit and water to snack upon. I told her Susan was pregnant. She smiled and congratulated us for starting a family. The sad news then came out as I told her from beginning to end of Susan's activities over the past 6 months. Susan's mom had been told nothing by Susan. She knew Susan had gone on a research project but knew nothing of where or what it was all about. She was appalled and cried to learn of Susan's decisions. She was most upset that Susan would even consider visiting her hometown, much less be enthralled with its culture. Susan's mother considered her escape like the Jews who escaped Auschwitz. At great emotional price, she and Susan had fled once before. Now Susan was not just playing with fire but had been burned severely, yet going back for more. Her mom was beside herself in anger, disgust, fear, and the pain of seeing her only child make such a fool of herself and her marriage. I had never seen a person in such distress before. My own agony had found a soulmate. We hugged for the longest time, each of us feeling the loss of a loved one, the same loved one. I cried. We cried together. We shared our loss and drew strength from the other. I felt as if her mother was taking Susan's emotional place in me for the moment. I felt comforted. The sun was setting. The long shadows of night threw their arms around us. We stood embraced for what seemed like an hour. Her tears wet my shirt and mine moistened her hair. Finally, our emotions spent, we broke apart. I was invited to stay overnight and continue my journey the next day. I was emotionally spent and accepted the gracious offer with thanks. After breakfast and some real coffee, I was again on the road for the 5-hour drive to my parents. I promised to stay in contact with Susan's mom. She really was a beautiful person physically and emotionally. I recognized how much Susan was, or had been, like her mother until Henry. My hate for him grew. I called my parents on my cell while on the road crossing the Colorado-Utah state line. No one answered at home. I tried Dad's cell phone, and he answered. He and Mom were visiting my brother, so I decided to extend my trip on to see my brother and his wife. The reunion would help bring some stability to my new life now that I was without Susan. I took a motel before driving the last mile onto the apartment my brother and his wife had. My brother was recently back stateside from Afghanistan, where he had served as a company commander of an infantry unit. After the usual hugs and handshakes and slaps on the back and a kiss on the cheek from Mom, I asked them to have a family time together with me in the front room. Since it was again getting along in the day, I suggested we order pizza delivered along with salads and soft drinks. The order was placed, and we gathered as family. The only ones absent was my other brother and his wife. I told them I had sad news concerning my marriage. Susan and I were divorcing. Mother cried. Dad asked if there was any chance of reconciliation. The whole story had to come out, so I began at the beginning with Susan's research project and my trip as a part of my job. We were interrupted as the pizza super was delivered. During supper, I continued with the details of Susan's changes, how she had worked on her thesis and her pending degree. Then I told of her pregnancy and how it occurred and how she was ambivalent about her relationship with me and our future. The pain welled up again inside me as the anger and pain conflicted me. Mom cried more and clung to Dad. Dad was also emotional, but showed it less, but his hands trembled and his eyes moistened. My brother became silent. He sat rigid, moving slightly in a stiffened fashion. I could see his military academy and battlefield experience attitude taking control. He stood up and walked around in deep thought. Finally, I finished my story. I had left out nothing. The only question came from my brother in the form of a statement. Ethan, he said with quiet but gentle authority, you and I need some time together. Let's just you and me take a walk. With that, he took my hand, pulling me off the couch, and we excused ourselves. It was early evening, so we drove to my motel. There we called the family to tell them where we were and that we would be back in an hour or so. Ethan, you are in a war and likely unprepared. I want to tell you how to conduct this battle. My brother took control of the conversation. There are rules of war to follow if you plan on winning. I know you are going to lose Susan, but you don't have to lose the war. Henry is your enemy, and he has to be destroyed without your suffering heavy casualties. I don't know what you have planned and frankly don't want to know now. After the war is won, you can tell me. Continuing his lecture on the conduct of war, first is to know your enemy. Know his strengths and his weaknesses. Carefully evaluate your own strengths and weaknesses. It is important that you match your strengths to his weaknesses. Do not allow him use of his strengths, nor allow him to exploit your weaknesses. Next, you pick the time and place to do battle. Remember, the element of surprise is very important. If you can, do what is called surgical strike. Limit the collateral damage. You don't want innocent people injured. Plan carefully. Keep your plans secret. Cover your steps in preparation. Do not allow emotions to dictate your actions. What you do and how you do it must be done in as short a period of time as possible. Do not get into a protracted battle. Think carefully, plan carefully, have more than enough resources to accomplish success. He smiled. I know you already have some ideas. Don't depend on someone else or for the civil authorities to do your work. Good luck and be very careful. Now, keep this talk private between us, just you and me. Don't tell even mom or dad anything. You are already in the battle, so remember these guidelines. Now let's get out of here and back to my place. The next morning we had breakfast together, then mom and dad left to go home. I followed them as I had something hidden in their attic that even they didn't know about. I wanted to retrieve it for future use. I stayed at home several days, sleeping in my old bedroom and bed from high school days. Mom was recovering. Dad and I had several long talks about my future. Nothing was said about my plans for justice. We just had a few days as family. Then it was time for me to get on with my life. Mom and Dad went to Walmart to pick up some things, and I went to the attic, found what I wanted, and loaded it into my big SUV. The next day, I was on the road again, headed home. Well, not home, but back to my apartment. My boss had been after me to go on another expedition, and I had told him I would go. Being shed of Susan made the trip easier to accept and plan. I told my parents of my impending 2-month trip back to the equatorial Atlantic off Africa. My trip was not scheduled until I had all my unused accumulated leave time used up. I had up to 3 months before I had to go. Returning to Utah, I put the gun, still in the boxes, in short-term storage. I knew there were satellites watching all of us, so I picked up some furniture from my former residence to put into storage along with the boxes with the gun in it. I gained access to satellite topographical maps of the area of and surrounding the town where Henry lived. These I studied intently. I wanted him. I wanted to kill him, but first he needed a lesson in humility. I also wanted not to go to jail or hang. The more I thought of it, I thought that killing him was to good. He would suddenly just disappear. His light would go out and he would not suffer. I thought of putting the bullet on his Johnny. I knew I could do that even at a mile, but the one shot could kill him. Just a couple of inches and it would, and he might bleed to death. Bleeding to death would be a better death for him than just blowing his head off. He would suffer some before dying, but I didn't want to kill him yet. Justice had to be applied so that his family and friends knew he had been humiliated and degraded. That was better than any death, especially by a headshot. Still, he might not fully realize that the shot was from an adversary. I wanted him to know that Susan's husband had done him in. Still, there had to be no way it could ever be proved. I smiled. I had Henry on my mind and soon in my sights. I was not going to let Susan off without some justice either. This meant contacting a plaintiff's lawyer. I wanted the meanest son of a witch possible. There were plenty available. My boss recommended one to me. I told him I wanted him to threaten the university with a huge lawsuit for agreeing with Susan's research and the way she did it. I was angry that they had condoned her immoral behavior. I didn't know the law and didn't really care. What I wanted to do was get the attention of the board of trustees and president. I figured bad publicity and lots of it would be just what they didn't want. He was a typical lawyer. For a fee, he would do almost anything. Anyone can file suit against anybody for any reason in this free country of ours. I had enough money to buy his attention. His first letter to the president of the university, with copies to every member of the board of trustees, got immediate attention. A $20 million lawsuit was something to be avoided. The return letter from the president indicated that Susan's degree was not yet granted. The board of trustees, and he had not given final approval. I instructed my lawyer to notify the president that the only way to avoid a lawsuit and the ensuing publicity was to have Susan's research rejected in totality. The decision to revoke her thesis and its research basis had to be final. That meant it could not be subject to review. I had to be totally satisfied. There would be no compromise on my part. It was less than 2 weeks that my lawyer received a copy of a Board of Trustees resolution that had passed unanimously. The resolution directed the president to correct the findings of the Department of Social Sciences. reprimand the people involved in approving her research, and deny approval of her degree. There was an additional stipulation, something in legal terms about with prejudice. My lawyer said that term was unnecessary, but meant that she could not use any her research again for academic purposes. The board went further than our demands. They wrote the publisher that had given her an advance indicating that the university's name could not be attached or used in any fashion related to the book. They went further than that by freezing Susan's research grant account so that further withdrawals would be denied. I was satisfied. Several weeks later, I learned that they had not been able to contact Susan to tell her of their decision. They had contacted my lawyer to see if he could provide the president with contact information. He called me. I gave him Susan's divorce lawyer's name and address, her mother's address and Henry's address. Susan was not at our former residence. I wondered where she was, not that I cared, but I guess I did care because I was thinking about where she might be and if she were physically safe. I hated what she had done but had concern for her physical safety and the safety of her unborn child, even if it weren't mine. It was not the child's fault. There was another aspect of my plan which I thought long and hard about before implementing. I was going to leave a message from God to Henry. This was to take the form of a formal document. I used the format of the Declaration of Independence with a number of whereas words. I would quote scripture to intimidate him. This part of my project took some careful on my organization. Bit by bit I organized it, proofread it, and edited it several times. This done, I purchased some very expensive linen paper and printed it out using my computer and inkjet printer. The final product looked very formal. I put the pages in a beautiful and expensive holder with each page carefully inserted in plastic liners, then bound into a converted wedding picture album. I carefully removed all fingerprints. I felt sure that with Henry's superstitious nature and his belief in new revelations and visitations from heavenly beings, that this document would intimidate him so much that he would accept his punishment as the will of God. I chuckled and felt good about my subterfuge. I was matching my strengths against his weaknesses. My brother's good advice was being heeded. I now turned my energy more toward my planned trips. One was to visit Henry. That trip was to be continued on to Africa without returning to the city from Henry's encounter with the avenging angel. I had the honor of being that avenging angel. I would appear from out of nowhere and disappear without a trace. I loved my plan but knew that any screw-up could lead to disaster for me. For success, I had to study and practice. Everything had to be done in total privacy. Having access to the internet made the private acquisition of information so much easier than going to a library where my activities could ultimately be traced. I studied the maps and knew exactly where Henry's farmland was. I knew what crops he planted, and when he tilled the soil, planted, visited, and harvested. The satellite photos available to the oil exploration companies were 100 times better than those available to the general public. As a geologist, I knew topography and the precision interpretation of satellite information. The visual spectrum was aided by infrared images and precision landscape heights to within inches. I could even measure the depth of tractor tire marks in the fields. I could see Henry and knew where he liked to rest out of the sun. There was a single tree at the edge of his wheat field, whose roots apparently had found a permanent water source deep in a crack in the surface. Nearby was a small ridge, just 8 feet high but perfect for hiding behind. There was an access road on the other side of the small rocky ridge. The dirt road led to a paved county road a couple of miles distant. The setup was perfect. I was picking the battlefield. It was to my liking. All this took several weeks of intense planning and study. In addition to topography, my studies involved human anatomy and certain surgical techniques. I spent hours and hours studying anatomy, certain aspects of human physiology, and certain surgical techniques. I learned that if both testicles were removed, most men would lose their sexual drive. If only one testicle were removed, the remaining testicle would still produce enough testosterone to keep the man's aggression and sexual drive intact. I wanted Henry to keep his desire for sexual gratification, but I wanted to remove his ability to satisfy his needs. Thus, he would live with sexual frustration. He would keep his high sexual energy, but not be able to satisfy his sexual appetite. I smiled to myself. Henry stole my wife who had sexually satisfied me. Now I was going to steal his method of sexual satisfaction. Tit for tat and an eye for an eye. I liked my plan, but danger was a constant warning to me. I had no desire to go to prison. If I was apprehended, that was a definite possibility. That threat honed my planning to precision. I made multiple visits to a variety of stores, buying what seemed like a storehouse of supplies. Actually, I finally had acquired only a handful of items and supplies. I had purchased some makeup things from a theatrical supply house from the internet. This included a full long gray beard, some special shoes, 3 sizes to Big Cam from a thrift shop. One morning my planning was interrupted by my lawyer. Susan had signed the divorce papers and was not contesting the divorce. I didn't even have to appear in court. The papers were filed and the mandatory 60-day time began. My lawyer had told her lawyer of the university's decision, but he already knew and had told Susan. Apparently she had lost it. She had really come unglued at the seams upon hearing that news. She had lost her precious degree, her research had been trashed, and she was a single pregnant woman with a child soon to be born out of wedlock. I talked to her mother, who told me Susan had been devastated. She asked me if I had had a hand in the university's decision. I told her that I certainly did. She should tell Susan that I had instigated that adverse decision as a retribution for her infidelity and 5 months of sexless marriage. I told her mother how I hated hurting her by hurting Susan. There is always collateral damage, and I truly regretted Susan's mom getting hit by the fallout flak from that bomb. Still, it was Susan who had initiated the cascade of dastardly deeds. Our residence was on the market and sold easily. We divided the equity money equally as agreed to in the divorce papers. Susan didn't want to live there. I didn't care where she was going to live. She might be allowed to live with her mother. As for me, I could decide later where I was going to hang out. The strangest thing about all this was that I had lost my desire for sex. My energy was totally consumed on my project. I thought, this must have been how Susan felt working on her thesis. I hoped my urges would return, but was not concerned actually. Susan had been my one and only woman. I never desired anyone else and still didn't. I just didn't desire her anymore either. During all this time, I regularly checked into the office and even did some pre-trip planning with my boss. Our surveying of the Eastern Atlantic potential oil fields was not yet complete. My expertise was needed again in Africa in the near future. I knew in my mind that, if carefully executed, this was to be my perfect alibi, providing I needed one. At this point, I had to take my geek friend into my confidence. That worried me, but I had to do it. I told him of my plan. He almost laughed himself silly, then said, "Let's get with it." With the help of up-to-date photos of each of us and his connections through his former FBI contacts and to the black market, he obtained blank authentic U.S. passports. He also got authentic-looking certificates and blanks for IDs. From these, he made us fake driver's licenses and passports with his name and my picture and my signature of his name. He made a passport with my picture and his name. Thus, we each had 2 passports. One was authentic and one with pictures and signatures reversed. Now we both had fake passports and fake driver's licenses along with our valid ones. While all this was going on, I assembled all the supplies I could ever need. I purchased these using cash only at pet supply stores, hobby shops, theatrical and outdoor supply stores, and medical suppliers over the internet. I had to use a credit card for internet purchases, so I kept these at a minimum and with no pattern of purchases. The most difficult was obtaining the ammunition for the gun I had sneaked in from Africa. I went into the wilderness of central Utah for target practice with the gun I had never fired before. I quickly became very accurate. Old skills can be reacquired in a short time. It was like riding a bicycle, just need practice. My plan was coming together. I spent some quality time with my geek friend coordinating our timing and our international flights. We had to meet in South Africa. These plans came together rather easily. I packed all my supplies into my big SUV and drove to Colorado. I rented a temporary storage facility in which to work and store my SUV. Using my fake Colorado driver's license, I rented an old nondescript automobile using cash. From that time onward, I wore gloves. I bought 4 used tires. These were installed on the rent-a-wreck car I had. The other tires were stored in the temporary rental storage facility. Everything was paid in cash. Thanks to small monetary gifts, even the sales were not recorded. I purchased a prepaid cell phone using my fake Colorado license and cash. I called my geek friend and gave him my cell phone number. He had also purchased a throwaway cell phone. Our calls would be hard to check on if it ever came to that. I was still officially on vacation, so nobody was checking on my coming and going. My geek friend was now ready to help me with the deception which would provide me with my perfect alibi. I was going to be in Africa when Henry met with his injured antagonist. We were set for action. Timing would be crucially important. I loaded all my needed equipment and supplies into the rental car. I rechecked everything. I had the gun, ammo, surgical supplies, camping equipment, desert camouflage, food and lots of water, documents, money and passports. I checked with my geek buddy and he was ready and eager. Now we waited until my company purchased e-tickets for me to go to Africa. I was scheduled to leave on the 10th of the month. I had just a couple of days for everything to come together. I already was packed for the Africa part of my trip. My friend took my Africa luggage. All I took was a change of clothes and personal toiletries. On my own, I purchased tickets to leave from Colorado. My personal departure would be on the 12th from Denver using my friend's name and ID. From there, I would fly to South Africa and meet my geek friend. He would fly from the city to New York and thence to South Africa using the passport with my name and his face. He would board on the 10th. He was to keep all receipts from airport purchases to later give to me. From South Africa, he would fly back to the USA using his own authentic passport. I would have arrived using my fake passport, but would continue on to Angola using my authentic passport. My friend would take all my luggage. My friend would only be gone for 4 days. He would hardly be missed. On the 10th, I made my move. My friend called me after boarding. My alibi was secure. My prey was in my sights. Justice was on the way to southern Utah. Destiny, Henry, and I had a meeting. I wore gloves so no fingerprints were ever left as evidence. As I neared the targeted area, I changed clothes into well-washed coveralls, a red long-sleeve shirt, nondescript hat, full fake beard, and shoes which I had filed off the outside rear of one heel. I put in the brown contact lenses. I drove through Henry's town making sure that several people saw me in the Utah license-plated Rent-A-Wreck. I had stolen a Utah license and saved the Colorado license plate. I scouted the area thoroughly. I believe I saw Susan, but couldn't be sure. I hoped it was her because I wanted her to know how justice was applied. I left without engaging anyone in conversation. That night I took up my predetermined spot about 20 yards from Henry's favorite resting spot, under the only tree of any size. Carefully I inspected everything, using the desert camouflaged items to cover me. My supplies were with me. I calibrated for the last time the exact dosage for the dart. Guess I forgot to tell you the gun was a dart gun used to bring wild African game down for transport to new habitat. I figured Henry would weigh about 280 pounds. I loaded the dart syringe for a 300-pound animal. I waited. I had my white robe on and was perfectly camouflaged under the tent. I looked at my document to Henry from God. I knew I had him at one of his weak points. The sun was very hot. I drank lots of water. It was hot under the camouflage tarpaulin. As I had predicted, Henry came out to work the wheat field. As I had predicted, near noon he rested under the tree about 20 yards from my hiding place. I took aim at his gluteus maximums, and with a bang and a swoosh the dart was firmly implanted in his buttock. He jumped and swatted the dart off his butt. It was too late. I rapidly climbed out of my tent. Now I was clothed in all white with no beard. I wanted him to see my face clearly. I was dressed as much as possible as I thought Henry would think an angel would appear. I had only about 20 seconds before he would be unconscious. I rushed over to him. I called out to Henry. God, how I hoped the tranquilizer worked, for he could have torn me limb from limb, but I was fully prepared. I had chosen the weapons for my war with Henry. I had chosen the battlefield and the timing. I had the element of surprise. Everything was going as planned. Henry, I yelled at him to his face. God has heard the cries and prayers of Ethan Allen, Susan's real husband. You have sinned. I am the avenging angel to administer God's punishment. Henry tried to stand but fell to his knees. His eyes were wide with fear. He tried to speak but couldn't. I came right into his face so he would see me clearly and remember me as the last thing he would see before becoming a changed man. His eyes glazed over. In a matter of a few seconds, he was out like a light. No one had heard or seen the unfolding of this dastardly deed. I was not a violent man. Henry was unconscious when the painful beginning of his torture began. Henry was mine. I gloated. If I had given him too big a dose and he died, that would be all right, but not what I wanted. Hurriedly, I descended on him. I was like a spider on her prey. I unsnapped and pulled his coveralls down to his ankles. No time to take his boots off. Next down was his all-white cotton underpants. We were under the tree and out of sight of road or house. I bent his knees outward. His genitals were perfectly accessible. I put a tight ligature around the base of his johnny after pulling lots of free skin back to the base of his johnny. I wanted him to heal, but without his weapon of sexual assault. My sharp number 15 blade surgical knife sliced through his johnny, leaving less than half an inch. The ligature prevented any significant bleeding. I laid his large johnny on his chest temporarily. I poured 10% solution of silver chloride on the stump of his johnny as an astringent. Quickly now, I applied another ligature to his testicles. Another slice through his scrotum, and I pinched the left testicle out. This was just how we did it to young pigs when I was on the farm in Colorado as a youth. A clean cotton string isolated his testicle. Pulling the string tight, I put triple knots in it and wrapped it again to hold the cord secure. The knife separated his testicle from its attachments. Again, I poured the astringent solution over the base and cut the string short. The scrotum fell into approximation with only a little help. He was going to live the rest of his life without a Johnny and with only one testicle. I was satisfied. I took his Johnny as a prize. I put it in a plastic bag with formalin solution as a preservative. I removed both ligatures. There was practically no bleeding. All my supplies were carefully stuffed into another plastic bag. I tied his testicle around his neck. I wanted to stuff it in his mouth, but figured it might kill him by aspiration or gagging. I didn't want him dead yet. I wanted him to enjoy the new freedom he had from such a large, heavy organ and 2 testosterone factories. I wondered what Susan would think. I chuckled. This served both of them right. I was pleased to serve justice with such finesse. I wanted to be gone when he woke up, so I didn't wait to gloat in person. Delaying gratification is a mark of maturity. I was mature. I collected everything from my hideout, then smoothed out the dirt. The last was to leave the written testament to the avenging angel's visitation. This I placed between his legs with his testicle proudly centered. It appeared as if the testicle was being served on the white gleaming plastic book. I was sure news of this would circulate in the town rapidly. It would have to get to me via some other avenue, as I certainly knew nothing about mayhem in the Utah desert. With this, I carefully gathered up all my stuff in 2 large black plastic trash bags. I put my coveralls back along with my beard. I made sure my size 13 footprints were easily seen. I checked to see if everything was picked up. The site was clear of everything. If an investigation ensued, I wanted the physical evidence to point to a large, slightly crippled man. I wanted the avenging angel to have the face of Ethan Allen. I forced an exaggerated limp back to the old rent-a-wreck about 1/4 of a mile across a field to the back road. Everything was loaded into the trunk. I checked to be sure everything was on board. No one was in sight. I was off. I had a quiet and very satisfying trip back toward Colorado. All my used clothing, the gun and beard were soaked in Boy Scout water, kerosene, burned in the desert and buried. The car had the original tires returned and I turned it in. The Colorado license plate was put back on and the stolen plate buried. The 4 old tires were sold by a bearded man in eastern Utah who wore gloves. I took a taxi to the airport and boarded for South Africa using the fake passport and ID. My SUV remained in storage. On the flight to South Africa, I reviewed again the message from the avenging angel, me, to Henry. Of course, I used 17th century English to make it authentic since his scriptures were King James Version style. It went something like this. Page 1. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Page 2. Thou hast sinned. The devil sent his messenger to thee, and thou hast listened to him, rather than to me, God. Page 3. Thou shalt test the spirits to see if they be true. Thou didst not test that spirit. Therefore thou wast led astray to lust after Ethan Allen's wife. Page 4. Thou hadst carnal knowledge to which I forbade you. Page 5. I have heard the cries for justice from my servant Ethan Allen. Page 6. Vengeance is mine. Thus saith the Lord of hosts. Page 7. If thine eye offend thee, pluck it out. It is better to be blind than to suffer the pangs of death in hell. Page 8. My avenging angel hast saved thee from eternal damnation by removing thy offending part. Page 9. Accept thy judgment of thy God, lest I return in anger, and pluck thine eyes out that thou sin no more by lusting. I slept well on my flight. I was at rest. I would occasionally feel my backpack and my trophy. I smiled. A part of Henry would always be with me. Somehow I was not angry or disturbed by that thought. I met my friend in South Africa. We exchanged pleasantries, and I gave him a large bonus. I was then off to Angola on schedule, and he back to the States. We disposed of our cell phones in Africa. Henry's Johnny was a magnificent trophy. My work kept me at sea for the next 2 months. After I returned to the States, I called Susan's mother as one of many phone calls to friends and family. Susan had returned home depressed. She confessed that Henry had become increasingly violent after someone had cut his Johnny off. She was afraid for her life. The other wives had nowhere to go. They thought they were caught. She had encouraged them to come with her into the evil outside door. They just couldn't. My brothers told me they were glad that justice had been done when I told them what I had been told. I neither confirmed or denied any part in the mayhem in the Utah desert. I attended the funeral and mourned my geek friend's death of an accidental overdose of alcohol and anxiety pills. I guess we just partied heavily on night. How was I to know he had begun to take anxiety pills? I gave up on thinking of killing Henry. A living hell was far superior to the quiet rest of death. Anyway, I might get caught the next time. After all, I was not a violent man. Susan was witness to Henry's humiliation. Henry survived, but was never the man around town anymore. Henry never filed charges. He accepted his condition as God's punishment for lusting after another man's wife. Susan left Henry, and returned to live close to her mother who helped raise her child. Both of them taught school. Susan never got her PhD. I thought seriously about re-establishing communications with Susan, but I could not bear the thought of helping to raise Henry's progeny. She never remarried. She followed her mother's footsteps in life. On what would have been our 10th anniversary, Susan received a shriveled, well-preserved human phallus. There was no return address. I thought it appropriate to return the trophy to the one who had once worshipped it. I had no need of it anymore. I had a loving wife and 3 children that took up all my time. I had no need or desire to remember the past. In war, there are no winners. Some lose more than others. I lost Susan. Henry lost his genitals and Susan. Susan lost her PhD, me and Henry. You, dear reader, can decide who lost most. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.